is flat. Center sky, it looks the same through the lens of my senses. At peace upon the plane.
It's 7/27/2022. This is Mandela's Last Stand. You're listening to Where is the Curve by Chief Crow and the Flat Earth Worms. So the purpose of today's live stream is to give anyone who has last thoughts or any observations on the so-called Mandela effect a chance to voice their opinions, post them here in chat, put other things out there that you want us to include in the documentary. The Mandela Effect documentary we've been working on is expanding to include more because we keep getting more research handed to us. And, you know, many won't be satisfied with our explanation if we don't debunk every single one or if we don't consider every possible explanation. So it's not even a debunking in that sense. So that's the main reason for this today. So I may take calls on that subject, but our focus will be the Mandela effect. And the way I'll guide the conversation is I'm going through the documentary. I won't share it on the screen, but I have it on my editing computer. And I'm going through it scene by scene, just kind of looking at each section. And I'll raise any points here to make sure we haven't missed anything, because it's meant to be thorough. The mass media's take on the subject has been very dismissive, shallow, and inconclusive, which is just typical for the MSM. If you don't know how fake the news is, you wouldn't be able to detect something like this. And again, this isn't a debunking, it's more of a documentary. The so-called debunkings have all failed because they take the wrong approach. It's not something that you can just debunk. It's something which has explanations for, because it is a thing. It's an actual phenomenon, but that's what we're asking here is, well, what is this phenomenon? Okay, I know we're overrun by bots, don't mind them, Skynet, or disgruntled YouTube employees, not sure which, but they only show up when we're talking about things that matter, that are important. If we were talking about the Kardashians, we'd get a pass. And by the way, I think Kim and Kanye might get back together, or they want to make friends before she starts reproducing with Pete Davidson. Okay, so we are joined by Dave Hoaxme. Dave Polk said, Mandela died in prison. That was part of the tragedy. No way, no how am I wrong? And I do find it interesting that the Mandela effect name itself, many Mandela affectees don't like that name because they don't know who he is or they didn't have a personal attachment to Nelson Mandela. So I used to say that the Ed McMahon effect would make more sense. It's a more powerful psychological, um, I think, impactful Mandela effect when it's somebody that you saw on TV versus someone from over there and it's somewhat ambiguous. But yes, many people are convinced Nelson Mandela died in prison, and they were amazed to find that he didn't. And what I'd like to point out here is that here's an example of a person who has been resurrected in a sense. And in many ways, I think it's fascinating in the way that he's a resurrected type savior. He's the figure at the middle of this miracle. And he's someone that we thought he was dead, but then he wasn't. It's like he came out of the tomb. So it does have this sort of a resurrected Christ type feel to it. So Nelson Mandela himself is kind of mystified. And the persona he has, and the way he's represented among the Mandela affected, bears little resemblance to what he might actually have been about. And I think the startling lack of information about Nelson Mandela outside of this one detail should tell you that this effect, I think, could easily be based on a couple of things, which we'll get into further down the line. But yes, we have someone who remembers that he died in prison. Another key point about the documentary is the idea that people use the word remember wrong. So someone says, well, I remember I put my keys here. I remember it was Berenstain Bears or Berenstein Bears. Whatever they remember, they say. But when they're saying remember, are they referencing an actual experience that they're recollecting details from? Or are they reciting a memorized fact? And back to Ed McMahon, when you ask somebody about Ed McMahon, they all say the same basic thing. Oh yeah, he passed around big checks, showed up in a van, he was on TV, sent us letters. And I'm like, well, how many of these people who say these things have actual memories of it? They all remember that he showed up at people's homes. Everybody knows. Well, that doesn't count as a recollection, as an actual specific memory. It's more of a recitation of a myth or something that's held to be true by the community, a popular myth. So I've relegated Ed McMahon to a popular myth. While I do acknowledge he exists, the idea that he was this person who would magically show up with a van and pass out big giant checks, that doesn't exactly exist. And there's a reason for the misconception. A lot of it is just in how it's framed. When someone would ask him, like let's say Tom Green would ask Ed McMahon, how did it feel passing out big checks? It didn't necessarily mean a big giant check. It could just mean a big amount. But usually out of context, it would be easy to say that, yeah, he did this as you remember. So they would add the detail of a real person to this thing that's essentially a myth. And I'd liken it to a myth in the sense that everybody knows Santa comes down chimneys, that Santa eats cookies, drinks milk, and gives coal to the bad kids, presents to the good kids. Like everybody knows about Santa. But has anybody actually seen him? Everybody knows he flies with his reindeer. Has anybody here actually seen Santa's sleigh? Well, obviously no. But then how do you know? How can we say that we know these things? Well, it's because it's a myth. And I'm saying Ed McMahon, as he's recollected by the Mandela affected, is kind of a myth that's been grafted onto the real thing. SpongeBob76 says, Tim, challenge Brian Stavely to a Jello wrestling match. Winner is right. Well, that wouldn't determine right or wrong. See, to me, there is an objective right or wrong, and it's not a popularity contest. It's not about silencing people or even ad hominem attacks, and I don't want to get into that. In fact, it's not about any one person, but anyone that promulgates this thing should own up to what they're actually promulgating. And many of them stand by it, and they have the effects they stand by. And I'm looking at this thing, categorically, can it be dismissed? Do we have to approach every single one? Have they made the case for reality shifts? Okay, let us continue. David Polk says, shout out to Tina. Rocco Calzone has joined us. Victoria Pandora says, I'm watching the Alex Jones show trial. Yes. Yes, he's going to end up paying 216 million. Let's go ahead and go into this really quick. I started a new daily blog, really short. This is just a breakdown of what we're going to discuss later. This goes out to Patreons and it's on my main blog. But anyway, the IPS Insider for 7/27/22. Alex Jones may owe the Sandy Hookers $216 million in damages. Was it worth it when all he did was back off the significant claims? The end result is the false flag and the official narratives remain unchallenged, and the inner workings of the PSYOP entertainment complex remain obscured. So later on, we'll be asking this question: was it worth it? Did we accomplish anything at all as a group of people researching this matter, or has it been obfuscated? It looks to me like a canary in the coal mine. They want to make the case that if you keep saying Sandy Hookers, they're going to come sue you. I'm not deterred by any of that. Nuke York. Well, New York, yeah, that's right. New York has the PSAs we've already heard, these public service announcements about the incoming nuke. And when you get nuked, go into the center of your house, huddle around your TV, and listen to the media.
So there's been a nuclear attack. Don't ask me how or why, just know that the big one has hit, okay? So what do? Outer clothing to keep radioactive dust or ash away from your body. Step 3, stay tuned. Follow media for more information.
Stay tuned. Okay, so that's just a short clip, but New York's already being prepared, and now it's been escalated to recommendations for go bags. So go bags are like bug out bags, and it's interesting to note that prepperism is now okay. It used to be if you were a prepper, you're like Alex Jones's listeners getting ready for some kind of event like nuclear fallout and run for the hills. Well, now in New York they're being told, get a go bag, and I'm like, where are they going to go? The PSA says, stay home, huddle in your basement, go to the center of your house and sit around the TV and listen to the news. What do you need a go bag for? If anything, they should just be packing a snack bag. Are fully vaxxed and definitely not sometimes computer-generated president caught COVIDs again. And this is despite being double masked, triple masked if you count the Joe Biden mask. The most likely sources for his infection, my guess, misinformation and climate change. Matt Gaetz is in the news for body shaming pro-abortion activists. My main question, though, is anyone checked his Venmo statements to see if he hasn't paid for any underage abortions recently? Gaetz, it has to be remembered, was one of the 20 Republicans who voted no to reauthorizing an anti-human trafficking law, by the way. And his wingman, Joel Greenberg, was indicted on 33 counts of stalking, theft, sex trafficking, crypto fraud, and SBA business loan fraud. Another topic, crisis actor gone wild. Alex Stein reinforces the central myth of the Uvalde Perception Management hoax shooting by ranting at the city council for not leading the police into Robb Elementary themselves. Let me go ahead and play a clip of this. We'll discuss it later. The ramifications of what he's done, which I'm saying what he's done here is on par with Robbie Parker. This is beyond.
Hey, you can't figure it out because you can't protect your 21 kids and you can't run a meeting digitally because you know why? He doth protest too much.
There he is quoting Shakespeare, and then even though they're sitting quietly and politely and one of them appears to be smirking, he accuses them of yelling at him. He's like, he yells at them, why are you yelling at me?
He doth protest too much. You know you're guilty and you feel guilty, and that's why you're yelling, that's why you're combating me, and that's why I'm here to expose you guys.
So there you have it. Reinforcing the narrative that people actually died, that the shooting was real. Very interesting turn of events there. But anyway, these topics, crisis actor gone wild, Matt Pizza Gates, Joe Biden's, whatever this is it his third or his fourth bout of COVIDs? Nuke York, and then of course the Sandy Hooker story. We'll discuss this all tonight. So if you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll have an idea of what we will be discussing that evening. So let's get back on to the topics again. We're talking about the Mandela effect and going through the documentary. T-Dog135 says, warning, words ahead. You know, I should have said that at the beginning. How many people just got injured or damaged by the words? I should have said something. Donnie of the Dead says, Hola Fepes. Mandela effect, misremembering with conviction. It could be misremembering. David Polk says, how can you debate the effect? You either see it or you can't. It's like seeing the con of convid. Either you can see the fraud or you can't. Now that's an interesting point there. Can you debate it? And we will get into this as we go through the slides that, well, it's basically my storyboard for the documentary, but I wanted to take everyone's perspective into account here, so I can't be accused of being dismissive. Donnie of the Dead says, you can send out notifications of live streams on Getter and Gab now. I may go back and add Gab. We have been working to add new platforms, add a few more. In fact, last night I added a couple more, and very soon we're going to be streaming live 24/7 on the TuneIn app. I got pulled off of Audible and Amazon Music like last week, and a bunch of people started emailing me saying what happened. So I'm making sure that we're on everything. So if you ever miss an update, just search and you'll find us on something else. All right, moving forward. A Woodward 7899 says, finally got to make a live. Yeah, Shannon Jones says, thanks for the notification. Go to infiniteplane.media. Live stream notifications are available for all. Scott Rankin says, greetings from Reno, Nevada. Isn't that very close to Black Rock City where they do the Burning Man festivals? I'd like to visit some of these locations. I consider the Burning Man to be, it's almost like the liberal Bohemian Grove. Same cult. Also joined by Connor G. AJ206 says, where's the curve? They haven't found it yet. And by the way, that track, I'll put it in the chat. It's Where's the Curve by Chief Crow and the Flat Earth Worms. You can find all the music at infiniteplane.radio. Now, Battery79 says, no amount of mental gymnastics will explain how wineskins changed to bottles. Now, we'll talk about the Bible effects almost as a separate category in this documentary, where they will say, oh, the Bible verses changed. So these are Bible changes. And I'm like, that's interesting, because people fight over the Bible all the time anyway. Various transcriptions, various interpretations, pronunciations. You put 3 or 4 Bible literalists in an elevator and lock it, only one of them will come out, like after a few hours. And that's because they don't agree on anything. So it's a very subjective thing to even fight over. You throw the Mandela effect in there and it's a mess. Can you imagine Jesus dragging a tree up a hill? I can't, because some will say, well, the Mandela effect is now saying that he was hanged on a tree, not on a cross. And there's some confusion about the word wood and cross that might explain this, but they jump to it was a tree. Well, if it was a tree, then he dragged a tree up the hill. Then people wear tree crucifixes around their necks, and there's trees on top of the churches, but I don't see that to be the case at all. So these are big claims to say the Bible changed. And one more, let's say it is changing. Why do we have to assert that it started with the Mandela effect, or CERN even, or even anything at all that we've recently observed? If it's a reality shift that we're seeing, then we should be calling it the God effect, that God's doing it. He does it to TV, Leave It to Beaver, Lassie. He does it to the various movies we watch just to tweak with us, but really it's the Bible where it's been happening all along. Like, you have to kind of make the case here. It's like, are we asserting that there's some authority here or some power that can change the Bible? It's big. And I'm wondering why we wouldn't suggest it was the God effect, not the Nelson Mandela effect. But it has a branding problem, but what doesn't? You know, Flat Earth has a branding problem. People just assert you're thinking a frisbee in space, not negating the very existence of outer space, which is what we're doing. Or we'll say the mud flood. mud flood is the least attractive name for a conspiracy theory ever conceived. And when you think about it, it doesn't even make sense. What are we talking about? And what we're really talking about are the possibilities of periodic floods and the sediment deposits bearing evidence of previous civilizations. So mud flood doesn't sum that up. And Mandela effect is something of a misnomer. I see some shifting over to reality shifts. In fact, the documentary is called Mandela Affected, documenting our shifting reality. Now, I realize on the trailer it was misspelled as documenting our shifting realty, and that was kind of an inside joke on the first version of the trailer. I wanted to kind of create a Mandela effect, create a discrepancy, then pull the first version. But my point being, we have to recognize that, well, as we'll go through in the documentary, that there are many things that are ambiguous, and oftentimes we recognize words by their shapes. I'm sure many of you have seen examples of this where you can take a paragraph, scramble the letters between the first and the last of each letter, and you'll read it without even noticing it was misspelled. So another thing about this here is the idea that there are misconceptions all the time. We have them. And we'll get into all these details. We haven't even moved past slide 1. I'm still going through everyone's comments. AJ206 says the infinite plane society will never be stopped. Well, we do have the infinite plan, and the infinite plan doesn't have to stop. And what we're doing is we've created a parallel media. You could call it an anti-media. It's not even alternative media, because what we're doing is separate entirely. So I'm kind of loath to use the word anti. I've used the word post media, but I find parallel to be a little more useful, because it's not like we're ignoring it, but we're looking at it from a safe distance. So almost like anthropologists, like we're examining a religion, an alien religion, and what it does to people objectively. And occasionally they try to censor us because what we're saying is accurate. They only censor us when we're right. That's what I've noticed. Jake McIntyre says Kamala said she wants to fill the oceans. I wonder with what? Yeah, Kamala Harris identifies as a purple suit. Did you all see that? Yeah, I think I even have it here. If you ever go to infiniteplane.media, I'm now building up a page dedicated to all of our reporters. So if you have a press pass and a Twitter feed, a Reddit, a blog, or TikTok, I highly recommend it. We can put some of these platforms that are otherwise useless, we can put them to use, and I'm working on that too. So every one of our contributors, people who report, who comment, you're welcome to be listed here on this page, and I will source your content, your videos, and your leads. Anyway, I was going through the list here, and someone had posted the link where Kamala Harris identifies as a purple suit. And I almost don't care to play it, because the whole pronoun thing is just boring to me and meaningless. It's like it's a power grab, whatever it is. It's kind of a joke. And until I see litter boxes in every public restroom for furries, I just think that all these people who are pushing for these new levels of political correctness are a bunch of hypocrites. Like, we got to take care of our furries first, the smallest minorities first, please. Okay, here's Kamala identifying as her suit.
Good afternoon. I want to welcome these leaders for coming in to have this very important discussion about some of the most pressing issues of our time.
The most pressing issues of our time, such as?
I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman sitting at the table wearing a blue suit.
A blue suit. And they all do it. It's very, very culty. Everyone mentions what they wear, their hair. I guess there's a reason for it. Okay, let us continue. The Missing says, it's believing in Mandela is as ridiculous as believing in Q. Now, there is one commonality here. Here's one thing. Nobody can explain what causes the Mandela effects. They don't have an answer. And with Q, nobody knows who Q is. So you do have this element of revelation from an unknown source, and there's a big question there. And that is accurate to say that they believe. Both of them are believers. And what we're doing here, this parallel media concept, is we're getting rid of belief in the realm of MSM, media. Why should you be a believer in something? Shouldn't we know? Like, I know they want to literally crucify us on crosses, not trees. They want to literally crucify us for not believing in climate change. It's like, well, I'm not a believer. I need facts. If that's problematic, you're going to have to exile me. Don't let me into your domed, enclosed smart cities in the future, because I just can't comport with that. Another comment here, someone says there's no explanation for how lions changed to wolves. Now that's a fascinating Mandela effect, and I do have an explanation for it. So there's a Bible verse that has to do with this future described where the lions lay down with the lamb. And I heard this firsthand from a lifelong Mormon who told me that in the future, and I remember thinking it was ludicrous. I imagined this. So I have a recollection of riding in my truck with a Mormon who was explaining to me how in the future there will be a time where there will be lions and lambs side by side, and they won't be eating the lambs. And I thought, this is ludicrous. This is against nature. How would they even survive? All this stuff. So I immediately kind of ruled it out, this idea of this future. So I remember, though, specifically being told lion and lamb. However, when you go into the actual sermons where preachers are talking about the lion and the lamb, you'll find that they're referencing a lot of things. Lion and lamb, swords beaten into plowshares. There's a whole litany of things that they're describing as conditions for the world once it's been saved. And they're not actually reciting the Bible verse that talks about the lamb and the wolf. So there's actually the recollection that people have. They remember a lion and a lamb. I do too. But that wasn't specifically a recitation of the Bible verse. It's part of a sermon, and the sermons are all of a certain variety where they pretty much list a lot of things, lion and lamb being among those things. And moreover, you do find a lot of lion and lamb imagery in the artwork in the churches. Sunday schools always have that kind of stuff, Noah's Ark and various images about the future. And I find that a lot of these popular expressions that aren't specifically biblical or tied to a verse perfectly by the letter are not included. And I will reference that in the documentary and go into detail about that. But I do believe that what I found is a pretty good explanation for why there would be this misconception. And the commenter here says, I've never took a med and I'm functional and I'm not psychotic. Right, well look, I don't think that people who are believers in the Mandela effect are in any way dysfunctional. I don't think it's the result of a defect. I don't think it's a result of possibly hubris or ego, the inability to admit when one's wrong. But there's something at work here, and that's what we are discussing. Victoria Pandora says, no matter what you say about Alex, they'll come for you next. Don't be Cavalier Tim. I don't think they will, because Alex Jones can't say the truth about the Sandy Hook scenario. He can't. He's not as... Look, Alex Jones is mainstream. He's MSM. And this is the thing. I'm part of a completely separate body of observers. And as MSM, he protects their assets. He maintains the integrity of these stories. So he cannot tell the truth about it. So he's not a threat to their system. He's not toxic as we are. Just by bringing up the existence of perception management and calling out detailed, the nuances, the things that expose the hoaxery, that makes what we're doing so threatening that they won't even address it. They will ignore me for life. I don't expect to ever get any kind of attention no matter what we say here. Because again, they only address their own. I see it as the mainstream media and alt media are both on Team World Stage. And we left Team World Stage a long time ago. They could care less about our opinions. Okay, let us continue. Salty Siren says, Ed McMahon's name was Egg Mc... Yeah, sometimes some people do sound like they're saying Egg McMahon. But no, you're probably conflating it with the Egg McMuffin. Okay, Stranger Days says, McMahon made a parody video of himself driving around to get checks back to pay his bills. Yes, he did. Enslaved by Truth says Publisher Clearinghouse did pass out big checks, though. They did. See, a lot of these things can be true. But because A is true, therefore B, in these instances, sometimes they make these arguments like, because he had big checks, because you remember this, it means he worked for publishing. Well, no, they're kind of jumping over a couple of important facts here, because there were two competing companies doing the same thing and had commercials running concurrent. And there are stories to explain these things. There's a history there. There's a history where Publishers Clearinghouse was aware that American Family Publishing was piggybacking off of their popularity, off of their traffic. That people were conflating their mascot with Ed McMahon. Because they all look alike, I guess. All the old white guys with glasses late at night during those hours. It's easy to remember, old guy, glasses, check, passing out money. And then you have all kinds of things that reinforce the misperception. And these would be what the Mandela effect would call the examples of residue. So on Johnny Carson, big check, they bring it out and they say, hey, Ed, here's one of your big checks, and it's a joke. How is that even a joke? He didn't pass these out. So there are reasons why people arrive at these conclusions, and we're going to address these in detail in the documentary. And I have I believe, some definitive clips that would undermine what many of the Mandela affected have accepted as basically carved in stone. And you can't carve your Mandela effects in stone, because that can change too, can't it? And another common theme that I see with Mandela effects is it's always either this or that. There's never a third option, which gets into what I think to be the cause of the thing, which we will get into. Mason Free says, will the Lake Mead water issue affect you where you live? I think if it affects, if it does what our worst predictions from Netflix and otherwise would suggest, then yeah, it'll affect everybody. The Kraken they're releasing is meant to affect everybody. Enslaved by Truth asks, radiation lockdowns next. See, that's what I'm thinking here. And this is key here. Like, the idea of radiation lockdowns makes perfect sense. They can simulate high altitude nuclear detonations easier than faking it on the ground. And they can use fallout to keep you indoors, to lock you down, to keep you around the TV sets. So absolutely. And could they simulate it? Would they simulate it? Probably not. I mean, they could, I guess. But what I mean is, will they actually poison us? I don't think so. I think that they'll have crisis actors, though, who will pretend like they're getting poisoned by the nuclear fallout. But if you watch the end of Stranger Things, it looks like the whole concept of hellfire in the Hellfire Club, it does end with the crack opening up in the ground and this ash-like stuff raining down. And I think that's the fallout. And by the way, in Austin, they've been doing drills for drone-borne dirty bombs. So if you're in Austin, you're likely to get targeted there as well. Okay, let us move on. Jake McIntyre says, it's Hollywood all by design. I know for a fact I saw him in the commercials in the 80s. Ed McMahon was a big name. He did Star Search. I don't care, though. Well, when you say, I saw him and I remember, this is where we're getting into an area that's very interesting. And one of the things we bring up is the phenomenon of faulty eyewitness testimony, and why so many people who are exonerated for false convictions are found to have been convicted by what? Faulty eyewitness testimony. And I think what we're seeing, the big picture with the Mandela effect, is this. Reality's on trial. Reality has been accused of being shifty. And you have all these eyewitnesses. Do we trust them? And that's what I'm doing here. I'm kind of, in a way, I'm defending reality against the claims that it's shifting. And that's what I think we're actually getting down to, is that, does reality shift? Does the past change? And that's the main assertion, that the past is changing. That the past has changed, and therefore now everything's going to be changed into the future from this point on. And I would kind of argue that it's not possible that it was always this way in the past, that these changes would contradict the now. And some of these changes are significant. For example, when they get into because look, many Mandela affected don't want it trivialized. So they'll say, oh, I don't care about snack food labels and TV show memes. I'm talking about the big effects like history and bodily organs changing. So they will say that the heart moved, that the kidneys moved, that our skull has more holes in it, that the eye sockets have changed. So they make these changes. And I'm like thinking to myself, if you're going to make these changes, or that South America moved, okay, so these are big. Well, if South America moved, then there should be evidences, there should be changes all the way down the line. Climate, weather, then of course when it comes to things with the body. Well, when people get shot and stabbed and killed, often it's because the bullet just happened to hit the right spot. So we're changing a lot of things all at once. And to say it was always this way, yeah, it's very problematic and contradictory. Aaron Roca, expressing his opinion, says the Mandela effect is for morons. See, I don't go for the ad hominem. If you did a Venn diagram, like, yeah, you could make that argument in some cases, but we have to remember that everybody fell for Apollo 11, everybody, and that the smartest people fall for the dumbest psyops every single day. So that doesn't mean anything. Smart people fall for it too. All right, let us move on. Okay, I'm going through your comments and then we'll start going through the documentary. Jurassic Liars, Elvis Seattle 611, Trump 84, Ohio says the reason Stein is famous is because Elvis equals Stein in gematria, the exact same numbers. Yes, when you get into the Berenstain Bears, there's a lot of reasons why people would associate it with Stein. As a kid, when you're a child, when you're reading these books, and that's another thing to consider. You're referencing memories that you formed as a child. That's a big difference from how you memorize things today. But the biggest word you probably knew as a kid was Frankenstein or something along those lines. So Berenstain, Frankenstein. I could see how you might make these associations and how Berenstain sounds weird. But a lot of these things just sound right, look right, or would feel more complete if it were this other way, which is not reason enough. JT33 says Skip peanut butter is way better than Jiffy. So Jif or Jiffy? Well, that's one I've looked into quite a lot, and the fact is, if it used to be Jiffy, explain the label change, because Jif barely fits as it is with their design. Jiffy would wrap around the entire peanut butter jar, and you wouldn't be able to read it. So that one's problematic. And so maybe people are seeing Skippy and Jif, and their mind's completing it. So they see J-I-F, and maybe their mind is completing it as Jiffy. Oh, Skippy or Jiffy. It's very easy to do so, and it's very easy to remember something wrong. I see it all the time. A lot of people do. It's a regional thing. Some families remember certain things certain ways. One Step Too Far says the effect is real, it's just not reality. Right, like it's true that some people believe in miracles, whether it's, and there are many different types of miracles around the world, every religion has them. So the belief in miracles is real, there's a reason they believe in it, but doesn't mean that it's real. And again, we're going through the Mandela effect, and of course, this is a concept that is supposed to justify why you misremember something, and when you see it, it's very jarring because it's different than what you remembered. Scott Watts says Procter & Gamble is now Procter & Gamble. The O was replaced. Okay, so here's one of the a typical example of a Mandela effect where Procter & Gamble used to be Procter and Gamble with a different spelling. And I can honestly say, I never went there. I never called them. I never dealt with them. I never took the time to properly memorize its spelling. And if the spelling, when properly memorized, goes against the way that the word is normally spelled, that's going to stand out as a discrepancy. So unless you can tell me that you had memorized it the other way before, maybe even wrote it down and you went there, then I don't have any reason to think you have an authentic memory of having experienced anything with Procter & Gamble. So that when you saw it, it was spelled in a different way. I think it was just different than the way you would have imagined. One Step Too Far says, I have video of Tim Pool talking penguin symbology. Oh, Tim Pool. Yes, I've seen his channel. He wears the beanie cap it's an all-weather beanie cap. 365. I think he wears it in the shower. All right, so look, if anybody's being rude in the chat, or if you have any bots, just hit them with the wrench. That's what it's for. David Polk says, I've never argued with conviction over a memory. Yeah, that's a really good point. We have to remember that the memory is fallible. And when you're talking about your memory as a source, I have to ask you then, did you get straight A's in school? Did you ever win a spelling bee? Like, prove to me you've never lost your keys. Show me your memory is perfect and that you're different from us. Show me that you were able to get straight A's without even having to study and memorize actively. I mean, memorization takes work. All right, we're moving on here. Again, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind, but what we're doing here is we're trying to get the best possible explanation for the apparent discrepancies, and I'm admitting that I recognize that there are discrepancies. And do I have any? Have I been, quote, affected? And this is, I think, kind of a false starting point to say that if you have any sort of discrepancy and they have a list, so they bring out their top 100 Mandela effects. If there's one there that you got wrong, you have inadvertently joined the club. But if you don't say, oh wow, I'm impressed by this. I thought he said life was like a box of chocolates, but he says life is like a box of chocolates. I'm on Team Mandela. Then you're part of their club and they love you. But if you say, that's not good enough evidence, maybe there's another explanation, a more likely explanation, now you're a Mandela effect denier. So from the perspective of the people in the Mandela effect community, you're in it. You just don't want to admit it. So everybody's in it. So what you're dealing with also is this notion that they call in the context of an interrogation. When somebody already has it in mind that somebody's guilty, you would call them a tainted witness. So I would describe the people who believe in Mandela effect denialism as tainted witnesses, meaning they've already convicted reality of shifting. They've already made up their minds. Now the question is, will other people believe them or not? They've already made their case. And so my point being, you having any kind of discrepancy or any misremembrance doesn't mean you're Mandela affected. It means they can lump you in. It's almost like a PCR test. Like, I just don't trust it. Or it's like the Engram test, the stress test the Scientologists give you. Or it's like anything from the DSM-4. You read it long enough, or DSM-5 or 6, whatever it is now, you can read the book that shows you all of the various psychological disturbances and illnesses that are out there, and you can find one that fits you. And that's what I'm saying with the Mandela effect. They throw the book at you, and eventually they're going to convict you of something. And then you're going to be stuck with, if I can't explain this away, I'm a denier or I'm on their team. And I'm saying maybe there's another explanation, which is what we will get to. And another point here, the people who fall into this thing don't have unanimous experiences. Like, for some, they always remember it the way that it was. Like, they're not all on the same page. Some people believe that the Mandela effect for them consists of this body of changes, but not these ones. So that's very contradictory in itself, because you would think they would all be on the same sheet. Like, they all experience the changes, but it's not unanimous. And so if someone woke up to one effect and now they're in the club and they're only affected by the one, well, what happens when you find out there's a better explanation for that one? A good example, and one we'll get into here, is the Ford emblem. People remember the Ford emblem as not having any kind of a swirly on it. It's just the word Ford. And then they see the spiral on the F and they say that's a shift. Reality changed. Well, no, if you do a little research, you find out that the little swirly is an E and it stands for Edison. And up close, the F looks like a T. And the reason why is they wanted to graft the initials of Thomas Edison into the Ford logo because Henry Ford and Thomas Edison were BFFs. Okay, Eric Mitchell says no live calls. We may take live calls, but only from the people who are Mandela affected. That's it. Nozilla808 says Dolly had bad teeth, no braces. Okay, now when it comes to the Moonraker movie, and many leading Mandela effect, what do you want to say, ologists, a lot of the Mandela effectees haven't even seen the whole movie. So they're judging whether or not Dolly had braces from one scene, one clip. And in that clip, in the context, it would make sense. This guy's got a mouthful of metal. This girl has a mouthful of metal. He smiles, she smiles, metal mouth to metal mouth. Now they can go have babies with metal mouths. No. I mean, as much sense as that makes, as harmonious as it is, that's not how the movie was. I even have news clippings from reviewers who said the movie would have been better if she had braces. So she didn't, but it would give you a sense of completion. However, if you watch the entire movie and you watch every single scene with Dolly, you will find that it becomes increasingly harder to suggest that she used to have braces. It only makes sense in the context of that one clip. Enslaved by Truth says not all versions of the Bible change. Caddy Corner says wineskins are now wine bottles. T-Dog135 says they sing the song The Lion and the Lamb by Big Daddy Weave. So when someone is singing a song about the lion and the lamb, again, they're not reading Bible verses that specify a lion and a wolf. And if you go into that Bible verse, and I go into it in the documentary, I'll read the whole thing, there are a whole lot of things in there that are supposedly going to be different when the world's saved. And the whole idea here, of course, is people conflate that lamb and wolf with the lion and lamb as a reoccurring theme and symbol throughout not only just religious art, but in the songs, of course, too. That's where people would come to memorize these things. Like they say it's a Mandela effect that Noah had a raven and a dove. Well, no, he sent both. And again, you have to read it in context. Outside of the context of the Mandela effect universe where they only present you with a clip, yeah, you can see how they might arrive at these conclusions, erroneous conclusions. So again, for example, I have a preacher who goes off for about a minute about how the world's going to change when the Lord returns. Among these things, the lions and lambs get along. But he's not reading the Bible verse, not even close. Caddy says they change logos all the time, so that's out. Plus, they can F with us via the internet. Yes, that's true. Now, the Chick-fil-A is another popular one. Many people who are affected by the Mandela effect believe that it changed because the K wasn't there before. It was Chick-fil-A, C-H-I-C. Well, why would you have that in your mind? Well, here's why. If you look at the box and you look at the packaging, when you get the French fries, it says C-H-I-C. The K is around the corner. So when you have your box of fries, you're never seeing it as Chick. That's one likely explanation. Roddy W says, congrats on IPS Insider. Oh yeah, so the IPS Insider is going to be this daily one-page blog post going over what we will discuss that day. And I'm probably going to record it as well and upload it into a news feed for news briefs, kind of like NPR. And for a while, I've wanted IPR to be like the anti-NPR. Same structure. I want to use everything that works, but we want to use it for reality discernment, not obfuscation. Although the NPR does occasionally tell the truth. They're the ones who reported on the over-reporting of school shootings in their article, The School Shootings That Weren't, where they found that, oh yeah, there were 300 school shootings last year. Never mind. Misreporting. There weren't any. Like the reports were completely off. You can only count the ones on CNN, I guess. And then they reported that the moon rocks are petrified wood, which hasn't been explained yet. For all the moon landing believers out there, you would imagine one of them by now would have come up with an explanation for why the moon rocks are made out of petrified wood, unless the moon is petrified wood. Okay, continuing down your comments. We have a flood of comments here, which I like because, again, I want to get every perspective I can. This is pretty much the last live stream on this topic before I complete the documentary, and I don't want to have to go to a part 2. Originally, I wanted it to be out on the 18th, which is Nelson Mandela's birthday, but that's when we put out the trailer. Caddy Corner says she dated a boy named Jeff and remembers his mom said to him, Jeff, do you want some Jif? Okay, see, there's a pneumatic device. There's a reason why you remembered that one. You had a device for it. You had an alliteration. Jif, Jeff. Makes perfect sense. Dang says Mandalorian effect. I've heard it called Mandoozle. I call them the effects themselves. MEs. These aren't cult terms, but useful. But the Mandela effect, again, is something of a misnomer. And I will get into the subject of Fiona Fitzgerald Broom, the one who coined the term. And she's a ghost hunter and a necromancer. And she believes that CERN had created a parallel universe for all intents and purposes in cyberspace that had somehow created some kind of some sort of a bridge. And this was explaining recent ghost sightings. So she's a ghost hunter and a paranormal investigator, and a necromancer. Rourke66 says he bought a Chief Crow t-shirt and loves it. And where? If you want to post a link in the chat, where can we get Chief Crow t-shirts? I would like to know. And I'll hand out wrenches here shortly. We put out wrenches for self-defense, and it maintains the sanity of the chat room. David Polk says, in my circle of friends and family, I'm the only one who could admit when I'm wrong. Yes, well, as Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool a man than convince him that he's been fooled. And this is the trick here. Part of the ruse is that when someone has been lied to, then they're obviously going to be defensive. So when someone is convinced that reality has lied to them, oh, reality shifted, it's lying. So now they're like, okay, I've been fooled. Fool me once. So they're like not going to be fooled again. So when you tell them, no, actually, you were kind of fooled by this misconception, they're going to more than likely double down and see you as Agent Smith trying to pull them back into the matrix. I wrote a short pamphlet, a 40-page PDF ebook / pamphlet, which is the basis for this documentary. And I started writing it and I put it out there and I'm just like, look, I'm going to develop this into a bigger book, maybe a documentary. I was called a God blocker and a consciousness assassin. It was said that the perception of reality shifts was necessary for prisoners of the Matrix to escape, and I was quite literally getting in their way. So I'm a God blocker to some of them, which is like saying, I'm an infidel, I'm a sinner, I'm a heretic, I'm wicked, I'm a heathen. I will take you to hell. And that's what they've basically accused me of. So every religion needs its devils, which makes me think that maybe this is something of a religion at this point. Travis Cloud says Dolly was hot AF. Well, the actress who played Dolly was in a commercial after where she meets the guy Jaws. And she doesn't wear braces then, does she? I'll have to check. And this is what makes the thing so confounding for some, is that it seems like there are residual imprints of the previous reality as exhibited by commercials that don't make sense in this new reality. And this is what they call residue. And there are many examples. Like, here's one, the movie Field of Dreams. If you build it, he will come. A reference to Shoeless Joe Jackson. So if this guy mows down his crops, builds a baseball stadium, this dead baseball player will come back from the dead and play ball. Makes sense. If you build it, he will come. But whenever you listen to a motivational speaker, they'll say, motivational speech, the person speaking will say, if you build it, they will come. Meaning, if you put in the work, people will show up. So it's kind of a cliche, and it's used by a lot of people because in the movie you see the guy goes against the grain, he challenges everybody, he challenges the status quo, he does this crazy thing, he takes the risk, and he gets the reward, a baseball stadium. So Field of Dreams is used in this context of when in your own life, when you're dreaming about your future. It's just sort of a nice idea. You work hard, you get results. But the idea that that's a Mandela effect, no. If you went to a conference and the guy who's giving the speech trying to motivate you says, hey guys, if you build it, he will come, it won't make any sense. You're like, who? I need more than one customer. If you say they will come, it makes a lot of sense. Another popular example, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. Luke, I'm your father. No, I'm your father. This is supposedly a major discrepancy. Well, only if you look at it in that 3-second context, that little soundbite. No, I'm your father, or Luke, I'm your father. Well, of course he's got to say Luke. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense, right? If he says, no, I'm your father, it wouldn't make any sense. And so this is why they cling to the idea that he used to say Luke, but now he says no. Well, rewind it a few seconds. Take that clip and expand it 30 seconds back and 30 seconds after that sequence, and what you'll find is that he uses the name Luke twice. So they're having a conversation, and then he says in response to Luke, no, I'm your father. So it makes perfect sense taken out of context. But then you look into TV shows or movies like Tommy Boy, where Chris Farley / Rob Ford, Chris Farley at the time, he's in the movie and he's saying, Luke, I'm your father. Well, again, this is because he's saying it to somebody else in the room as a joke. So if you go up to your friend and you say, no, I'm your father, quoting the movie verbatim, you will get a confused look, if not punched. But if you say, Luke, I'm your father, they instantly know that you're pretending to be Darth Vader. So it's all about context and how when these things are recontextualized, they have to alter some of it for it to make sense in the new context. So this is called, you could call it cultural appropriation. So these various sayings are appropriated and reused, and they're given something of a life of their own. And another point here, because both with the dolly has braces and this Luke, I'm your father thing, we're talking about broader context. So the Mandela effects are always referring to a memory in isolation. And this is important because if you dig deeper, you find that there's no substance there. So there is this argument that everybody knows Timmy fell down the well. Everybody knows. Even the author, actually even the main character Timmy, John Provost, he wrote a book called Timmy Fell Down the Well. So everybody knows it, right? There's no reason to think that Timmy didn't fall down the well because Timmy wrote a book about it called Timmy Fell Down the Well, or Timmy's in the Well. Then I ask, well, how did they get him out? Because if you remember Timmy falling down the well, how did they pull him out? And again, this is a myth. I'm saying this is more of akin to a myth than an actual memory. They're remembering a popular myth. Like, you don't know for a fact that Santa Claus flies in a sleigh and goes down chimneys. It's a myth. You don't know, even though everybody can recite this fact that Timmy came out of the well or fell down a well. So I would ask, though, how did they get him out? And I get no response. Nobody can tell me how they got him out. If you fall into a well, it's a big deal. And there's got to be some techniques. Do they use a rope? Do they use a ladder? I mean, there's no answer. And so they couldn't have ended the episode. Was that the final episode? of the whole thing? No. So there are many explanations for the recollection. There is a scene where Lassie pushes a man into a well. Now, John Provost put a book out called Timmy's in the Well. Why? Because he said Timmy fell into ravines. He fell into basically everything you could imagine except for a well. So as a joke, he put Timmy's in the well. It was the one place he hadn't fallen. And I found an interview with John Provost where he talks about this. And he goes on at length to describe all these other misconceptions. In fact, it's funny, John Provost actually debunks several Mandela effects, or rather contradicts them with explanations. I won't say debunks. I'll say he offers other explanations in that interview, which you will see in the documentary. Chris says, maybe feeding Mandela suspicion is making us incriminate ourselves, and the awakening truthers can call us crazy conspiracy people. Well, if you look at the way the Mandela effect have been represented in movies like the Mandela Effect movie, they're always crazy. Ideas are a powerful thing. No, ideas are a dangerous thing, is the tagline for the movie. And the whole point of it, the movie, is people can't let go of things. They can't accept change. So they grasp onto delusions. And the Mandela effect gives them the ability to justify any delusion, to not confront reality. So it is, in fact, being framed that way. And I think it's interesting that it's being pushed very heavily among those who see through the fake news. Because if you see through the fake news and you continue to study it and determine what does this mean, what is the real meaning of the fact that our news is fake, then you start addressing this, it makes the fake news seem like a nothing burger. Oh, who cares if the news is fake? Reality's fake. So I almost think that this is to distract news deconstructionists with reality deconstruction, which I don't think these things are mutually exclusive, but there's a flaw here in the logic. So if you're going to argue in favor of the Mandela effect, then you're going to have a hard time convincing the same people that you're trying to convince that you're serious if everything can change at any moment. So maybe no kids died at this event today, but next week it could be 33. So reality exists or it doesn't. Reality shifts or it does not. The Mandela effect puts reality on trial. And I don't think it's been convicted yet. I think we have a lot of faulty eyewitness testimony that we're parsing through. Salty Siren asks, were braces even a thing in the 70s? Good question. What kind of braces would she have worn in the 70s? David Polk says, I heard unicorn is in the Bible now. Now, many people are surprised by things that they were previously, I would say, ignorant about. So, for example, I didn't know there was a unicorn in the Bible, therefore it changed. Well, maybe you didn't have full information. I didn't know there were tiny holes in the lower mandible in the front. Well, maybe you've never seen an actual skull. Maybe your concept of the skull has always been a stylized version of it. So, did you read the Bible word for word? Would you be an expert witness? So we're going to find out. Did something in the Bible change? And we're going to present this in this trial against reality. So this is on Court TV. Are you going to get on the stand and say, I can attest that the unicorn wasn't in here before? Because if you're not an expert on the subject, do you have enough information to know it wasn't there before? And I would say no. Same for those who are claiming that the body is changed, that the kidneys moved. Have you ever done have you ever done an examination of a cadaver? Even in simulation, have you ever seen kidneys? So, if you've never seen a skull, like a skull outside of the movie props department, but in real life, these are important things to consider, because I do think that we have stylized representations that we memorize. Many are surprised and shocked to find out that South America is not directly beneath North America. So I can understand why you would have a misconception. Let's say you're a child and you're playing the game Risk. In the game Risk, South America is directly below North America. And it makes sense from a childish perspective. North is directly above South, South is down, North is up. So I can understand why you would think so. logic would say it's Southeast America. If it's that much over to the right, it'd be Southeast America, right? Well, no, if you look at the globe, or you look at the globe as it's represented, there's, yeah, it's not directly below. So did it change? This is supposedly a Mandela effect, but you can't tell me you remember South America being directly below North America unless you can tell me how you got that perspective. Are you telling me, did you go to the moon? Did you go up high enough to see North America and South America? Or are you referencing the same maps and globes that are, somewhat contested and very, very much not the territory they represent? I mean, it's pretty well known the Mercator projection overstates the sizes of the northern hemisphere continents and vice versa, understates the size of the southern. There are many misconceptions that people have about what the world is. And to say that you knew South America was below North America, how did you know? What is your source information? And again, I'm saying that there's a reason why we need to pay attention to how people use the word remember. Are you an expert witness here? Mark Twain says, I watched Moonraker 50 times and Dolly had braces. I can't explain this. Okay, we have someone here willing to testify he watched it 50 times. Now, that's interesting as a claim. I would like to watch it and see if it's actually that good of a movie. I find that hard to believe. I find it harder to believe that Moonraker is good enough to watch 50 times than Reality Shifted. I'll accept the Mandela effect first. Now, since you've seen it 50 times, you should have no problem producing a few scenes for us, or at least citing them. Okay, let us continue. Dang says unicorn could be misinterpreted as a narwhal. Well, there you go. People who've never heard of narwhals, but who are Mandela effect believers, might now say narwhals are an effect. Okay, David has some more here. David A. Pryor says, King Tut's mask having a snake and birds on the forehead is pretty big for me. Another one, no forefathers in the first sentence of the Gettysburg Address either. Okay, again, I'd like to know, what is your source memory for King Tut having a snake and a bird on his forehead, or having one or the other? What is your source? Scooby-Doo? Disney? I mean, these are serious questions. History Buried says, I suspect this is an operation, subliminally implanted memories, MK Ultra style, being carried out on the affected. Yeah, that's another possibility. Another possibility is that it's real, but it's being done by human agencies. That there are people going through your bookshelves and your VHSs, which is a very nefarious thing. It reminds me of the movie Dark City. And I think it's outside of the scope and capability of any human government, but who knows? If they can stop time like they do in that movie, anything's up for grabs. But that's what we're asking here. Are we looking at something supernatural or something with a natural explanation? And if we want to go with natural, then you're going to be left with quite a task when you try to explain how the Bible verses changed. All right, let us continue. Adam Geringer says, how do we get AM and FM stations? Money. That's pretty much it. I found a station in Florida with a pretty good audience. And I might be broadcasting through, it's very easy these days to do this. I can have our program carried in a station in Florida. It's just a certain amount of money per night, but presumably it's worth it if you can get 30,000 people over the course of an hour to tune in for an average of 10 or 15 minutes. Just people on the random, especially when we're taking calls. So one of my plans is to, on certain nights, open up to wider audiences, especially in the wake of big psyops. Joseph Bender says, how can you promote Chief Crow? Yeah, as far as the shirts, I don't know if somebody can post it. I wasn't aware if he had a store or anything. But again, if you want to go ahead and post a link, please do. Generally, you search on the internet and you can find their shirts. All right, let me see. Mark Twain says, I remember watching the scene with Dolly after the Mandela came out. And if you see close up some shine thing, it's erased but not entirely. So that's residue. They see residue of braces on her teeth. So this is interesting because it's saying that the reality shifts aren't perfect, which is also a kind of a fascinating little side note. That the reality shift didn't happen entirely. There's a little bit left. That you can find residue. You can find examples of it if you go on eBay and find some old VHS. And in the original versions, if they haven't been tampered with, that's one of the claims. But what's strange about this claim is that they reject residue if it doesn't fit their narrative. Like, for example, the Risk board game, if you look at the Risk board game, the original versions of it, South America is directly below North America. Like, directly. It's a game. David Pryor says, the actors get it wrong too. James Earl Jones and Mark Hamill say Luke in interviews. Yeah, they say it in interviews because they're paraphrasing. Again, say to anybody, no, I'm your father. It makes no sense, and it's confusing. Say, Luke, I'm your father. It puts it in context. It's sort of like comedy. When you're delivering a joke, you have to set the stage for context or it doesn't make sense. So a lot of the times in interviews when somebody's recollecting a scene, they paraphrase. They can't do the entire scene. James Earl Ray could have recited the entire scene. Now let's go with your explanation and let's just pretend he did say, Luke, I'm your father. Well, then back up your tape 30 seconds and fast forward and move it forward 30 seconds. So expand your frame of reference. And then he says Luke too many times. He says, Luke, blah, blah, blah. Luke, I'm your father, Luke. Instead of Luke, no, I'm your father. So if you're going to change that and you look at it in context, it makes no sense. It makes less sense. All right, we have a link in the chat to Chief Crow's t-shirts, and I'll put that link on my website, on the Minds link as well. Appreciate you posting that. Again, we are going through the Mandela Effect documentary and anybody's comments on this because I want to get it all in before this thing is fully edited. Garrett Summer says Flipper got Timmy out of the well. See, I kind of remembered that, but I didn't want to say it. I felt kind of dumb. It's like, I can't be the only one. Salty Siren says the little girl from The Ring ate him. Yeah, that's also a possibility. The girl from The Ring ate Timmy. That's why he never got out of the well. Travis Cloud says the Sally Field confusion comes from when she accepted her award for a movie and MIA quoted it there. Yes, there are examples you can find again. Garrett Summer says the Mandelas of then might be fake, but the Mandelas of the future will be real. Yeah, I was wondering, are the Mandela effects going to die off? If every Mandela effect relies on analog and VHS and things nobody cares about, then it's going to die off. So I'm like, I hope they start doing some Mandela effect conferences and start having some Mandela effect children because it's going to die off. Or it's going to metastasize and everybody's going to... And this is a problem too. Everybody knows fill in the blank Mandela effect. If everybody knows, then how come everybody doesn't know? Everybody knows, but they don't know. Only you guys know, so you got to tell them. If everybody knows, you don't have to tell them. So you can't say everybody knows when you're referring to a minority. And you're contrasting them with the majority who don't know and are denying it. So what you should be saying is, everybody's denying Dolly wore braces. You shouldn't be saying everybody knows. And that's part of the game. When you say everybody knows that Dolly had braces instead of Dolly didn't have braces, you're already sort of, I would say, biasing the person you're interrogating. Jake McIntyre says, if you have any consideration of what CERN is doing, what are they suggesting with time in the Gotthard Tunnel ceremony? Yeah, I saw that tunnel ceremony with the horned god, and I thought Cernunnos. the god of the wild forces of nature, the horned god. That's what it looks like to me. It looks just like paganism in general. And when you get down to it, the great rite of witchcraft is the merging, or it's the, I guess you could call it a alchemical wedding, the god and the goddess, the sun and the moon. And that's a reoccurring theme. It's the union that creates the spark of life. And so in CERN, by colliding particles and then trying to recreate the Big Bang, I think it's just a ritual. It's a ceremony. And it's the same ceremony of the god and the goddess. Again, the forces of nature, the wild energies of nature. I think it's just light. Ultimately they worship light and dark. It's alchemy is what I've been saying. So I'm thinking that what we're seeing in CERN is some kind of alchemical ceremony or ritual. I have a question about it. 17 miles across, 300 feet deep. What's the curve of the CERN? Like it goes in a circle. Earth curves 8 inches per mile squared. Is there any curvature? Because you would think it would have to be perfect. It would have to be perfectly level for this thing to work. Okay, continuing here. History Buried says, the Mandela Effect show on Beyond the Veil last night, I had to turn it off because they started talking about dinosaurs being real and how they will be brought back with CERN. Okay, so I've considered the possibility that they're using CERN to convince us that they can create portals. Meanwhile, they're developing Hyperloop, the billionaire blimp club. You got Richard Branson and Elon Musk drilling these tunnels underground, the Boring Company, Virgin Galactic. And what they're doing, I'm thinking, is maybe they're actually going to simulate space travel or simulate portals or both. In other words, if they can effect some kind of simulated space travel now, just with Disney technology, and they can convince us of portals, then perhaps, I'm not saying dinosaurs, but perhaps they could bring things in from the other continents we're not allowed to access, which might include dinos. I don't think so. But if there are any dinos, they're from another continent, and they're going to bring them through the Hyperloop tunnels, and they're going to say it's from the CERN portal. That's my first thought on it. Erica Creech said, Tim, somebody called in one night and said the maps had changed, and that creeped me out viscerally. Yes, the maps changed, but not the territory. The map is, they use language to, as something of a prison in some ways. And I think they use maps as well to constrain our imaginations. If you believe in the globe model as presented, you're on a 12,500 mile leash. There's nowhere to go. You go halfway, you're coming back. The nearest habitable land is light years away across an unimaginable gulf, just pure blackness of an abyss. So there's nowhere to go. You're essentially on a prison. You're in a closed system. That's what they put us on. So why imagine anything beyond? Plus, this thing has an expiration date. It's gonna be destroyed by a meteor, climate change, or misinformation within the next 5 years anyway. So Earth is doomed. So land is finite. You're on a 12,500 mile leash, and time is finite, and the end is near in the end times. And this is my point. I think they introduce worldviews to constrain our concepts of our lives and our existences and what they mean, so we don't conceptualize life 500 years in the future when we get rid of all the crabs in the bucket. But so what I'm saying is, like, the dystopian views we're given are meant to put us in an end times state, so they truncate time. They limit our time and our concept of it, just as they have land. And it's an important question. People would say, well, why would they hide the shape of the world? It's like, wow, what a programmed response. It's like saying, why would somebody lie? It's just the most naive thing. Well, resources, land, abundance, control. There are so many reasons you can go into for why governments lie. The fact that people have to even ask is really startling. It says the media has succeeded in convincing people that, yeah, this is a priesthood you can trust. Enslaved by Truth says the kidney thing does seem weird to me too. Right, but you had a concept that the kidneys were somewhere in the lower back because of cartoons, maybe the phrase kidney punch, whatever that got you to think that you knew where the kidneys are situated in the body, uh, may not have been a medical textbook. So if you look at a medical textbook and you find out, actually, they're not where I thought. What changed? The textbook or your concept of where the kidneys were? Did the kidneys actually move? And this matters because this would change a lot of things with basic surgeries, among other things. The location of the kidneys being somewhere and then moving. What about all the kidney thieves, who put you in the bathtub full of ice and sell your kidneys? Like, this stuff matters. One day they go to work and they can't find your kidneys. So no, you'd have to convince me that you knew where they were firsthand, that you were an expert in that field before you can say that changed. It's very similar to when somebody says dilemma used to be spelled with an MN and then it changed. And so they think it changed, and I'm saying, well, what's more likely? Occam's razor? What's more likely? That the dictionary changed or you spelled it wrong on an ambiguously spelled word that has a history of being spelled both ways, depending on where you were in the world at the time. There are histories behind every one of these words you can trace, and you can find out why it wouldn't even make sense to call dilemma a Mandela effect, because when you look into the root words, you find that it was always the two M's. Unless you're going to contend that the Latin root changed too. Again, when you dig deeper and you expand the context on every one of these effects, you find that outside of the limited context in which it's presented, the Mandela effect explanation makes no sense. Most of the time, as you will see when we start going through the slides. We're still on number 1. I'm just trying to catch up on chat. Travis Cloud says, the Gettysburg Address never said forefathers. I had to memorize it as a child when we visited the battle in Penn many times. Abe Lincoln was only the 15th oars our forefathers would have sounded. Interesting. Again, you're going to say it changed. You have to tell me, when did you memorize it first? Because you'll find the people who actually spent the time around it have a more solid conception. Like, I'm very curious to know about Joel Osteen, or Joe Alstein, or Joe Olstein. Like, I don't know which. Am I Mandela affected, therefore? Did I just prove reality shifted because I don't know the name of that goon? No, I don't care. He has no relevance to me. However, I've looked into it, and at all of the various images I can find of this preacher and his logo, it's very ambiguous. Am I looking at Joe, Joel? Am I looking at Austin or Alstein? It's very ambiguous. The L makes it ambiguous. So what's more likely? It's ambiguous and I don't care enough to memorize it correctly anyway, or reality shifted and I'm in denial. And if you're going to say reality shifted, then I have to wonder, Joel Osteen, did he have to rememorize his name? Like, how does that happen? Does he even know about it? Garrett Summer says the Westworld Tower is called Overwatch, like the Overlook Hotel from Shining. Now that is an interesting point there. The Shining has all kinds of 9/11 predictive programming, as well as Apollo 11. So for the Overlook Hotel to have a Westworld connotation or connection is interesting. I'll look into that further. Okay, let us continue. Travis Cloud says, please, affect people call in. Yeah, if you're a Mandela affectee and you want to call in, you're welcome to, and it will likely be included in the documentary. And all we want to hear are your accounts. This is not a debunk. I don't really do ad hominem. It doesn't prove anything. Okay, I believe we're almost caught up on... Okay, Angst G brought this one up, and this is feasible. McPeanut, or Mr. Peanut, stole the Monopoly Man's monocle. So why do people believe the Monopoly Man has a monocle? Well, because it's a stereotype. All rich men with top hats and lots of money have monocles. You can look at McScrooge, Donald Duck's rich uncle. You can look at Mr. Peanut. You can look at any number of these characters, and that's part of the costume. You can find Monopoly Man costumes with or without the monocle. It's just assumed. It's kind of a stereotype. And then you have Jim Carrey, who did the monocle thing when he impersonated the Monopoly Man. Well, why would he do that? That's because he's trying to do an impersonation, and you have to create a character people will recognize, and just the hat isn't distinguished enough. He's got to build it up, and I think he went with the popular conception, the stereotype. Speaking, that's what we're looking at here. Stereotypes, paraphrases, not literal. Art of Thinking Out Loud. Common Sense Analytics says most Mandela affected people are born before or during the 80s, so they'll die off someday, and the psyop will pass or evolve onto something new. I believe it's going to go through a rebrand. I've been saying, what are they going to do? Have conferences, meet others, have kids, and raise their kids to be Mandela affected? And I actually have seen a comment where someone had said that he was going to show his kids a bunch of these movies and then later bring the movies back. Like, this guy had worked out this idea that he was going to try to see if he could affect his kids with the Mandela. It's like, good luck. It may just go away. Unless reality's actually shifting. But that's what this documentary is about. Have we ruled that out? Dave Hazel says, I put my money on CERN being fake. I would say that CERN's about as real. And it's not just CERN, there are many such things, but the idea that they are opening portals and affecting reality, yeah, that's been obviously debunked. It's basically an altar to Cernunnos. That explains the 666 and the Horn God ceremonies. It explains everything. It's a movie set, kind of like the ISS. Yeah, I guess CERN is sending the sex bots. Every time we start talking about CERN, we get these chat bots that are trying to sell us on dating apps. So they're coming out of the portal. Dating app bots out of the portal. I wouldn't download those apps. Thrustazar says, the Brits spell things arbitrarily. Yeah, exactly. So what's going on? Are they experiencing a shifting reality? No. All right. Every base is covered. Everything's we're gonna go into detail, effect by effect for the most part. But I want to make sure we cover alternative explanations as well. Jenna Lovecraft Rees says trivial stuff. Well, this is what they'll say. They'll say, oh, I don't care about the trivial stuff like the labels and the memes. I care about the big ones like JFK's car. It's like, wait, you're saying JFK's car used to have 4 seats, now it has 6. Are you saying that JFK actually died? Are you saying it was a real event? And then when you're saying you remember it, where were you in 1963? I find that problematic. You have someone who's like 25 and he's like, I remember Ed McMahon passing out checks. You remember? You were like 1? If that? I don't think you remember. And I got more problems to introduce here. So let's say Ed McMahon used to pass out big checks, which he did, but for Publishers Clearinghouse. And a lot of people won the money, and a lot of people are rich. Well, where are the families who got rich off of Ed McMahon handing them the checks? You think somebody would call in and say, yeah, I was kind of born into money. My grandmother got a check from Ed McMahon, knocked on her screen door one day, huge check, balloons, and a van, and she won $10 million, and now here I am. I'm a beneficiary of something that never happened in this reality. It's like, that's interesting. You got like a trans-dimensional family fortune. That's residue. So that would be an example, though. Like, where's the money? Where are the recipients? Where are the prize winners? They're kind of oddly missing. Did they shift off to a different reality? Okay, so we're about to start going through. Now, David Pryor says, did you cover the alleged religious messaging in the doc, like C-3PO's golden calf being the removal of an idol? That's pretty good. So if you remember, C-3PO, the robot, used to have 2 golden calves. Now he has 1 silver calf. Now, does that make sense? Removing a golden idol, golden calf? I don't know. I thought it was a golden cow, not a calf. Was it a calf? And even if they didn't, look, there are explanations, which we'll get into. JT33 says, I actually do remember big ass checks being handed out. Yes, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you do. But do you remember it from Ed McMahon? Or do you remember, like, for example, are you recollecting? Let's say your memory is stored in a drawer. So you have memories of late night watching TV, and then you have commercials from competing companies like AFP and Publishers Clearinghouse. So you see all these old guys passing out big checks. It ends with Ed McMahon, and you think, I'd like to get Ed McMahon's money. You bring in the mail after school, and you see Ed's face, and you hope it's one of these big checks like you saw on TV. Like, I could see why you might conflate these two companies. One of them had the big checks in the van, and the other, they did it in a similar way, I guess, but my point is Ed McMahon worked for the smaller company, AFP, not Publishers. So you may have a recollection of him handing out the money, but you don't have a specific recollection of it being for Publishers Clearinghouse. What you have is a couple of memories that have been conflated and confused. And then when brought back to your attention by a Mandela-affected person who was a tainted witness, they led you to conclude that reality shifted or there is a discrepancy. See, they are alleging a discrepancy when maybe there isn't one. Like, is it even possible? Has it even been established that reality can shift in this way? Well, no. So they're alleging a discrepancy when there may not be one. Again, they're putting reality on trial, and I'm suggesting you're looking at faulty eyewitnesses. Benton G says he doesn't care about it. Wow. You're not going to make many friends who do, because they see you not caring about the biggest, most momentous conspiracy theory of all time. It makes you look like you don't care about much. This is bigger than Flat Earth. It's bigger than Q. The Mandela effect is a path out of the matrix. At least that's the sales pitch I've heard. Do I care about it? I care about truth and discernment and understanding how magic tricks work, especially the magic tricks that are used by the MSM every single day. Enslaved by Truth says, Publishers Clearinghouse got sued and had to pay out settlements for being a scam. Did anybody win? So there weren't any winners? Okay, so let me go through the slides. Now, I don't want to give you any spoilers. So I'm not playing any of these clips. And many of these clips, much of what I have to show, is stuff that you're not going to see from the people who are convinced this thing is what they have already concluded. But we are talking about causes here. So are we looking at LARPing, live action role playing? Are we looking at misconceptions reinforced by cognitive biases? Are we looking at delusion? Are we looking at reality shifts? My point being is that I believe we're looking at an assertion that reality is shifting and that the testimony is biased and that the person who's asking the question is not feeding them answers in specifically, but indirectly and limiting the number of possible answers. So are we looking at reality shift or tainted witnesses misleading unreliable eyewitnesses? And that's my contention. Unreliable witnesses. And if you think that your memory is perfect, then you would be someone I would trust as a credible source on some of these things, but I would need proof. Because again, reality itself is being accused of shifting or lying. And so what their aim is, it's to convict reality in the court of public opinion of shifting. That reality is presenting false fronts and it can change at any time. It's lying to us. That's the primary claim. It's lying, that it can change, including human anatomy. And these changes are retroactive except when they're not. So for example, Jesus hanged in a tree, they say, but they fail to explain why the tree has not replaced the crucifix. Now, the false explanation, or I mean, I'm saying false, but maybe I'm wrong, but the explanation of a reality shift is, I would say, bypassing more likely explanations. So you have your alleged effect, then you have your possible explanations. First, those need to be exhausted before you go into the supernatural. Like you lose your keys. Did an elf move them? Well, maybe you should find out if you misplaced them first. Why would you jump? So you have to jump, in order to reach the supernatural, you have to jump past conventional explanations, personal misconceptions, and popular misconceptions. So do you actually remember Ed McMahon handing out checks any more than you remember Santa Claus going down chimneys? Or are these both things that you've just memorized? Are these both part of what I would say popular myths? So with each one of these, Jif or Jiffy, with the peanut butter, well, what are the conventional explanations? Well, you conflated it with Skippy. Two brands, similar. Then you have personal misconceptions. You just got it wrong. Maybe your mom bought a generic brand. There are off brands that can explain many of these things. And then there are, of course, the conventional explanations that generally suffice. So why do people remember Fruit Loops as being spelled Fruit instead of Froo? Well, their explanation is miracle, Mandela effect, reality shift. My explanation is I don't remember it being either way, and if I remembered it as fruit, I would feel like, okay, something's wrong here, but am I going to jump to the supernatural? So then I looked into it, and it turns out that you couldn't legally have sold a cereal with the word fruit in it unless you literally had fruit. So early on, the Fruit Loops brand had to go with OOT because they weren't including fruit. So there's no way it could have been spelled the proper way. It could not have been. So if you remember it that way, I would ask, well, how do you remember it that way? What are you remembering it from? Did you put it on a shopping list, buy some Fruit Loops, and maybe you spelled it that way? Do you have a recollection? Because you wouldn't have a basis for one. Even if there are reality shifts, that would be something prohibited by laws regarding advertising and false advertising. And you can go down every single one of these effects and ask yourself, here's the alleged effect, this is where you're alleging reality shifted, and what are the conventional explanations, and weigh those first. The Bigfoot question also, I think, is something that could be brought up in this way, where you ask, what's more likely when it comes to a sighting? A bear or a supernatural being? And until you can rule out unequivocally bears and find a place where there's no bears and sightings, then you wouldn't be able to have a basis for ruling out the mundane explanations first. And the reason I would say a bear is more likely than a supernatural thing is that bears are often bipedal. You can see them walking on their hind legs through the woods. They don't only do it in the circuses. And so if you see a bear walking upright, yeah, it will probably look Bigfoot-like. So again, my point being, before we jump to the supernatural, you have to rule out the regular, mundane, boring explanations. Now, if you don't, if you jump from, I lost my keys, therefore an elf moved them, or I misspelled a word, therefore CERN is messing with my head and changing the dictionaries, you're actually using what is called the non sequitur fallacy, meaning you're basically jumping over a lot of things. It doesn't logically follow. So as I looked into this, I'm seeing that you have the true believers, who I would consider to be tainted witnesses, who are the ones who are primarily behind framing the questions. I'm not the one asking people. I wouldn't even frame it that way in the first place. I wouldn't say A or B, because I'm already limiting the potential options. And if you're talking about an unlimited, limitless, shifting reality in a multiverse with infinite possibilities, why would you have to limit it to A or B? Why wouldn't there be 60 or 70 different versions and iterations of everything? How come reality is only a little bit shifty and it's not obvious except to a small group of people? let us continue. Again, we're discussing why and what causes it. And so I think it can be easily observed that a lot of people need to believe. And the need to believe is almost more important than the need to know for many people. That's why people believe the news. That's enough for them. They don't need to know. And knowing takes a lot of work, and it goes against the grain. We're media gnostics here, which is not a good thing from their perspective. They want people who believe because they're easier to lead around. They don't have to convince them of things. They're pre-convinced. They've accepted the burden of proof. And as someone who deconstructs media on a regular basis, you can't ask me to drop my demands for evidence when it comes to this particular thing. And I'm saying the same, like for example, the same level of scrutiny and critical thinking required to debunk Apollo 11 would automatically rule out the possibility of the space station being real. Yet, a lot of Apollo 11 debunkers still believe in the space station. That doesn't make sense. There's a level of consistency that I see lacking among the Mandela affected when it comes to their analysis of this effect versus their breakdowns of the news. And oftentimes they'll say, well, the news doesn't matter. Reality's changing. That's a much bigger story. And that's why I think this thing may actually be some kind of a distraction mechanism. Something to discredit and distract. Okay, so let us continue. I have a lot of things I'm not going to share because I don't want spoilers. But I have an article from Times Arts. It's a review of Muckraker, in which he describes how it would be a little bit better if only Dolly had braces. I found a few reviews where people commented that braces were missing. They needed braces for it to feel complete. Now I have an article from a person. Let me see if I can find this person's name for you. I'll share this article in the documentary, but I have an article from someone who goes into Fiona Fitzgerald Broom. So I have some good information about her, and she's the one who's credited with having created this thing. She's a necromancer witch whose favorite environments appear to be cemeteries and haunted places. She's known as America's most notorious necromancer, Fiona Fitzgerald Broom. She's been on Science Fiction Channel's Ghost Hunters, and she's the one who coined the term Mandela effect. And she believes that it's likely some kind of reality shift caused by CERN. Now here's what this person wrote about it. He says, contrary to what appears to have become common wisdom among internet conspiracy theorists, the propagation of the Mandela effect consists of a well-coordinated web of disinformation agents attempting to inform the impressionable public that specific details of historic events used to be different, telling them they remember something that never happened. The main method of operation is in promulgating the notion that established memories may be false. Through reverse psychology, they trick the unwitting masses into believing these false memories are realities emanating from other dimensions. So there are some who would contend that this is false memory syndrome. False memories are being implanted. And I think there is something to it. But I wouldn't call it a false memory. I would say these are vague recollections being falsely designated as memories. Sort of like when you get the answer wrong on a test. Did you remember it wrong? Did you actually have a memory of it being the wrong answer? And then it changed? No. You didn't have the right memorization in the first place. So these are falsely designated remembrances. Another one, a Flintstone, and this might seem trivial, but again, these are things you see when you're a kid. So another point to consider here. There are people who say that reality shifted because Fred Flintstone used to have the spelling F-L-I-N-S-T-O-N-E, Flintstone, when in fact it's Flintstone. What's the explanation? Ambiguity. They sound the same. Flintstone, Flintstone. The T's practically silent. You don't have to enunciate the T. And when you listen to the song Meet the Flintstones, you can hear it both ways. There are elements here with these effects where there's ambiguity that could explain it. But when you again you take it out of that context of which do you remember, A or B, expand your context. Fred Flintstone makes sense because he works in a rock quarry. Flint is a stone. Flint stone. His best friend, Barney Rubble. Well, rubble makes sense. Flint stone makes sense. Flynn is not a stone, whereas a flint is. So, is there even a discrepancy? Should reality shift even be on the table, or are they just throwing reality shifts at the wall to see what sticks? That's what it looks like to me. Let's throw all our reality shifts at the wall, and eventually they'll find one that they can pin on you. And now you're a believer or a denier. Up to you. All right, I'm continuing. I'm on page 38 on my storyboard. Okay, this is a fascinating one. A lot of people seem to remember, and this is funny to me because I went to go watch the new Elvis movie and I saw a commercial for Shazam, like a genie movie. And I'm like, wow. Because there was already a Shazam according to the Mandela Effect, played by Sinbad. So why do people remember a movie called Shazam where Sinbad's in it? Well, it's because Sinbad is the name of a pirate. Sinbad dressed like a pirate with big poofy pirate pants. He had a hoop earring and a goatee like a pirate. So here you have a guy who looks like a pirate, and pirates and genies kind of look the same. So you see this kind of build up of a character. So now everybody remembers Sinbad was a genie, and they seem to remember a movie called Shazam. And then they find out, so that they'll bring it up. Hey, you remember a movie with that guy Sinbad where he was a genie? So then you just recalled their memories. Sinbad, collection of memories, kind of dresses like a pirate or genie. And I do remember enough there to go with it. So they remember something. There's a there, so they say yes. It never existed. What? I remember something. Now they're Mandela affected. Well, maybe the something you remember is a vague collection of recollections and not a specific memory. Because if you actually remember a movie called Shazam, then what was it about? How did it end? Did he get the girl? What were the wishes? If you can't tell me what the wishes were, then you're really lousy at watching movies. And your memory is so bad that I can't trust you on any of the other Mandela effects. If you don't remember what this movie was that was so good, it was on TV, it was so good you remember it 20 years later, and you don't know what the wishes were, I'm sorry, but you're not a reliable witness. That's like a muddled Della effect. There's nothing there, just a muddled memory. But I did find there was a very popular movie at the time, and it was called House Guest. The movie had Phil Hartman from SNL and Sinbad in it. And Sinbad on the movie posters is coming out of a mailbox. And the background is a smoky, cloudy sky. So if you remember Sinbad at the time and you went to any movies, you would have seen Sinbad looking like a genie coming out of a mailbox at the same time that the movie Sinbad would have existed. Donnie the Dead says, I ate my Flintstones vitamins grape flavored. See, there's a specific memory. You ate the vitamin. These vague recollections don't work with me. You're going to tell me you saw this awesome movie that was so good you could get it on TV. That's how good it was. It was so good it was prime time, but not good enough to be memorable. And look, if somebody said, hey, I got a script for you. Oh, this is a hilarious movie about a genie. You get some comedian like Sinbad to be the actor. I'd be like, well, give me the script. I'm going to go sell it. I'm going to go sell it to somebody in Hollywood for a few $1,000s. Easy. It'd be a good script, but you don't remember it. That's too bad. I mean, I watched Vanilla Sky too many times, maybe 5 or 10 times at most. Maybe 8. Maybe I'm exaggerating. And I know every line, every scene. I could storyboard the movie from memory practically. So the idea that you watch this fantastic movie about a genie and you can't even tell me the 3 wishes, again, very discrediting. Kate Pilardi says, I remember it. Okay, well, what were the wishes in Shazam? If you remember a movie about a genie and you don't remember even a single wish, then I'm going to say you're not a reliable eyewitness. So, we're waiting. If you can tell me, what did the character wish for that Sinbad gave him? Otherwise, I'm going to say you don't have a memory. You're recalling a popular misconception and myth. Katie says, look it up. I'm saying, no. Burden of proof is yours. You are asserting that a movie that never existed did exist, but it doesn't now. And so if you're the one who's going to assert it, then you would have to provide it. Okay, Katie says there weren't any wishes. So if there's a genie movie and there's no wishes, fine. Let's continue. All right, Ed McMahon, we'll deal with that one in the documentary. Some of them are really silly. Like, for example, people remember Britney Spears having some kind of schoolgirl outfit with plaid. I don't remember either way. I can't specifically say I remember this wardrobe. And so this is considered to be a Mandela effect. I have a quote from someone here who says, I'm really on the fence with this one. I feel like plaid was what she wore, but black looks right as well. I wasn't a Britney fan, so it's a tough one for me. Okay, so if you're not a Britney fan, then why would you use this as an example of maybe reality shifted or maybe it didn't? What's more likely, reality shifted or a pop star changed her wardrobe? There are conventional explanations that make a lot more sense. And then there are the stereotypes. Every stereotyped preppy schoolgirl costume has plaid skirts. So again, do you remember Britney Spears in one of these videos with the plaid skirt? Or are you recalling a stereotype, a generalization? Which is what I would contend. Synchromorpheus asks if jet engines are in the documentary. And Kate Pilardi says, I'm a shill. No, I'm a God-blocking consciousness assassin here to stop you from the promised land that's on the other side of the next Mandela effect. So don't listen to me. I'll keep you from finding out that you're Neo in the Matrix. I'll block your awakening because I don't believe in this. Because your perfect memory recalls a movie that never existed, but you don't know the basic plot. Now, jet engines. This is another interesting one. Some say that the jet engines have moved, that beneath plane wings, they used to be towards the back, now they're in the front. It's an interesting assertion, but if you're moving such a major component, it changes the physics. It changes everything about the plane itself. And you're talking about a very specialized field, aerodynamics, and would it matter if you just willy-nilly move the engines? So what's more likely? If you're not a pilot, if you're not a medical examiner or a surgeon, for example, there are some things you might not know. So you might not know where kidneys were. You might not know what a skull looks like in real life. You might have a stylized representation in your memory. So when you look at airplanes in cartoons, they look a certain way. It doesn't reflect reality. So my question would be, what's your basis? Because some people have asserted that jet engines have they just moved entirely. The answer is both. Okay, a commenter wants to call in and tell us about Shazam. Just want to give you fair warning. Somebody might take this script idea and run with it. If somebody gives me a blockbuster Hollywood movie script that doesn't exist anymore, I'm like, yeah, I'll take that and produce it. I'll just claim it. I'll dedicate it to Nelson Mandela, but I'm going to produce Shazam. Okay, phone's open. The number's on the screen. I'll put the number in chat if you want to call in, and we can talk about your reality shifting, if that's your best explanation. There you have it. Put the number in the chat if you want to call in, but I'm only taking calls from believers. If you don't believe, I don't know if you can add much, unless you have some other explanation. Damien Fury says, I just watched the clip of Shazam dressed as a genie coming out of a bottle. It's College Humor that has the video. Yeah, that's a spoof. Okay, so we have to continue. Again, I've been called a God blocker. I'm fine with that. I believe everyone here should get their own opinions out there, and the viewers can arrive at their own best explanations. I don't need to tell people what to think. I have a pretty good case here that the Mandela effect is a false explanation for miscontextualized recollections, compelled recollections, in a manner that suggests that there's a discrepancy, and that discrepancy equals reality shift. And that hasn't been established yet. Infinite Plane Radio, which Mandela effect are you calling in on?
What's up, man? Why are you acting so shilly?
Well, we're actually discussing what
I'm
causes
putting in the comment when I was telling you about the Shazam movie. It was with Shaq, but you kept refusing to say that. So what's up with that? Why don't you look up the movie Shazam with Shaq, not with fucking whoever, Sinbad.
Sinbad. Well, Sinbad's
So you're a shill.
Well,
that's what you are. Okay.
Are you saying the Mandela effect's real?
Yeah. I'm not
real?
saying the Mandela effect is real at all. No, I'm not. I don't believe in it at all.
Well,
but
I said
do
to
know.
call in.
I watched a movie called Shazam. Yeah, I watched a movie called Shazam with Shaq about a fucking kid and Shaq being a genie. The kid was with a single mother or some bullshit. One of them sob stories. But it was a movie. It was not with Sinbad. I don't know who the fuck made that shit up, but that's a total lie. And I don't understand why you refuse to read the whole comment.
Well, that's the Mandela effect. We're talking about the Sinbad
No,
Mandela
that's not
effect.
the Mandela effect.
So
when did the Shaq was actually a movie. But I'm telling you there was actually a movie called Shazam. Okay, so whether or not it's somebody's Mandela effect, it was an actual movie. So they have that misconstrued.
Well,
that's all
okay,
I'm saying.
Okay, well then Shaq
Shaq
threw a
look
wrench
it up.
into
Look
the whole
it up
thing.
right now. Look it up, dude, on the screen. Look it up.
Okay.
Shazam with Shaq.
I'll put it.
Probably came out. I was probably 12 when it came out.
You said Kazam? You said Kazam.
Shazam?
No, that's Kazam with a K. We're talking Shazam. You're talking.
Okay, yeah. Well,
there's another.
Yeah, I did say Shazam, but no, it's Kazam with Shaq, right?
Okay, well that makes a lot more sense. Appreciate the call.
Right.
It's Kazam. Perfect explanation for the confusion.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Fascinating. All right, thanks for the call. All right, so look, I'm not trying to bury anything, and I appreciate him bringing this up. Great point. So, 737 says, I Shazammed my pants. Well, Shazam is actually an acronym. The name Shazam, it's from Marvel Comics. I believe it's, Shazam is... Shazam. It's an acronym for all these various gods. I believe it's Solomon, Hiram. Oh, here it is. Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury. That's Shazam. So Shaq kind of screwed things up there, but it wasn't his fault. Kazam. A little infringement. Linda says Shazam got Kazammed. Okay, so was I wrong? Was I wrong? Am I a Shazam shill? Did I shill, or am I a Kazam shill? Was this guy a Kazam shill? Did Shaq pay the guy to call in and promote his crap movie? All right, let us continue. I appreciate the clarification, though, because look, that adds to it. Because now you have more building to this generalized notion of there being a genie movie that rhymes with Kazam or Shazam. It's just close. It adds to it. And this is what I'm saying. When you have popular misconceptions, it's kind of a paraphrasing. It's like a potluck of all these concepts thrown in there. And you can kind of see how things could be derived after the fact. Okay, so let us continue. So let's talk about miracles for a moment. And look, these are very educational things. It really is. It illustrates points here to take these calls and these things, because there never was a Shazam movie until just recently. In fact, who's in the Shazam movie? Please don't tell me it's Shaq. There is a new movie. I just saw a commercial for it, and it looked terrible. I mean, they all look terrible. Anyway, let's move on. We'll get back to these things in detail in the documentary. Jake the asshole says you're guard railing the Shazam Kazam conspiracy, you terrible shillbag. Right. Well, am I a shill? Or was he jumping the gun in calling me a shill? Like, am I a nefarious God blocker here to stop people from seeing the truth? Or was that just a great example of how memories get conflated? And Damien Fury says if you type Sinbad comedian, you find a clip of it on College Humor. Okay, now when it comes to miracles and beliefs, this is, I think, the area we're actually getting into. The Shroud of Turin. How many of you believe in the Shroud of Turin? The idea that when Christ transcended, he left an imprint, like a photograph, on a shroud. Like, is that evidence enough for you to believe in everything else that follows because of it? And that's what miracles offer. They offer you a tangible reason to believe in a bigger supernatural story. So it's not about one Mandela effect. It's about reality itself now being shifty. And this is possibly a good thing. It means you're seeing through it. Thrustazar says, which God are you blocking? The God that brought Nelson Mandela back to life. The God that moved your kidneys. The God that changed dilemma from MN to MM. Some kind of trickster God, I imagine. Yeah, who am I blocking? The AI God in control of some quantum supercomputer? That's what's at the end of the movie. Enslaved by Truth says, on the VHS tape of Kazam, there's a trailer coming attraction for a Sinbad movie called First Kid. Travis Cloud says, keep Shazam's name out of your effing mouth. Okay, so my question is it okay for people to believe in airplanes and jet fuel coming in and melting buildings? Like, you know, there are myths that we're always debunking. Is it okay for people to believe in asteroids or impending doomsdays from climate change? You know, people have climate anxiety. We have climate doomers. So in the bigger picture here, on this channel, what we're doing is we're deconstructing false news, fake narratives, fake history. And so I find myself wondering, why would this be any different? This is why we question this. This is why we question all supposed truths or explanations. So the main thing here is reality on trial, or is the Mandela effect on trial? And to me, the Mandela effect is consistent with what we would call false or faulty eyewitness testimony. And again, psychological explanations, like what we're always deconstructing here, they only work because the public doesn't understand what media is. They think the news is a source of factual information. They don't understand. They don't have time to. They just believe. So when I'm looking at the Mandela effect objectively, I'm saying, you know, is this the best explanation, and what other explanations could possibly fill in here? And a lot of people who've looked into this have not fully reverse engineered it. So the adherents are claiming that reality is shifting in supernatural ways. That's a big claim, lacking in any kind of substantive evidence. And then the other side of it too, the contradictions. I'm going to be going through some various explanations here in a moment. I'm about 75 pages through my storyboard. One of the main things I come up with here, though, is hopium. You know, hopium is huge in the truth community. That's what makes QAnoners QAnoners. They're hoping for a great reset, what they call a great awakening. And they'll take anything that confirms it as true. In fact, right now, the QAnoners think that Donald Trump is not Donald Trump, but he's JFK Jr. in disguise. Like, they've gone that far. So there's a strong need to believe, and a lot of people sell various beliefs to these people who need to believe. So why would you want to believe in this? Well, it's an escape from reality over which we're powerless. It makes you a player in a bigger cosmic game. The guy who called me a God blocker, he said that the world is hell to him. He hates his life. And I'm not criticizing him for it. Not everybody loves their life here. But to say that the world is terrible and this is the way out is to say that this is just another religion promising another type of a heaven. And this is similar to many other religions where, one, you have relics, you have miracles, and then you also have believers who provide social and cognitive reinforcement to help the group grow. And the other side to the group is, and the dark side to it, is the fear of being outgrouped, the fear of being rejected. When you get accepted into any cult, you get love bombed. Everybody loves you. You're one of them. When you go against the group, everybody hates you. The fear of being outgrouped keeps a lot of people locked in. And I've seen some Mandela effect promulgators call non-believers sheep, denialists, shills like me. So you're in a group, everybody loves you, and you get to witness what happens if I go against the group. Oh, they're going to call me a shill. They're going to call me a God blocker. You're going to be demonized. So it's part of group dynamics, I think, here, to bring the sheep in and then make them very well aware of what happens if they ever stray. So the leaders often warn about the non-believers. They'll say, hey, these are heretics, and their words have the power to disintegrate our community. They will undermine our core beliefs. They are bad people, basically. Now, 1 million people misremembering something does lend credibility to these discrepancies. So another question, can 1 million people be wrong? Can millions be wrong? Is everybody always right? Are we all A students? And we know the answers here. History is what? Lies agreed upon. Napoleon said that. Now, it's long been speculated that mistaken eyewitness does play a major role in wrongful convictions. And this is huge. There was something called the Innocence Project, and they found that 75% of exonerations were due to inaccurate eyewitnesses. So again, I'm asking, how good of an eyewitness are you? Jake the Asshole says, if a channel only talks about Mandela effects but not about the world stage or deep fakes, I find that suspicious. Well, I get the feeling that this is part of a collection of wrong explanations. It's a collection of guardrailed explanations, limited hangouts, because I find that this is an easy way to distract people. It really is. And look how unsolvable it is. How come we've been on this topic? This topic has been around for years. And how come it hasn't gone away? How come it hasn't been treated effectively? Why has it been left kind of hanging as like, maybe, maybe not? It should be definitive one way or the other. Now, when they ask these questions, one of the dynamics is, if you have a charismatic person asking, it makes a difference as well, if you want to be on their good side. So when the person asking the question is sort of a gatekeeper to a community of people who will accept you, you can't really treat that person as anything other than a tainted witness, and they have a already pre-convicted reality of shifting. And another thing, this is like gaslighting. Gaslighting is when somebody gets you to question your perceptions in order to supplant your will with their own. Oh, are you sure you know that? Are you sure that's the right answer? Are you sure? When they get you to question something that you hadn't questioned before, they give you the illusion of a discrepancy where maybe there wasn't one. And what if there wasn't one, but now suddenly there is? So by inserting doubt, they're able to get you to question your perception. That's gaslighting. Mandela effect pushing is gaslighting people. Are you sure you remember this? And then getting you to choose sides further gaslights you. It further gets you to go with something that you can't really know, and you're allowing the person to kind of fill in the blank for you or allow you to. It's a very subtle sleight of mind trick to get someone to doubt a recollection. And then, of course, your cognitive bias will reinforce whatever answer you give. So they get you to doubt your perceptions, and to assume a level of certainty about a memory that may not have been important to you in the first place to even bother memorizing it. So if you think moon landings are fake, but then reality is shifting, what kind of eyewitness are you to the malfeasance of NASA? And moreover, we're talking about our minds and how they work, how we can be tricked. We all know the importance of learning how to see through body language, how to recognize lies, crisis actors, green screen, visual lies. And so I think it's important to understand how memory works. And witnesses can be subjected to memory distortions quite easily, retroactive interference. So retroactive interference is a phenomenon that interferes with your recollection, and this is when new information is processed along with the old information that's being retrieved. So the processing of the new information can disrupt or taint the old information that was actually memorized. So it's called retroactive interference. So they say, no, reality is retroactively changing. No, your memories are. They're going back and getting you to recall a memory, providing new information, and then you add it in. I found a very good clip, and this is going to be in the documentary, where a psychologist is doing a study, and she talks to somebody about Disneyland. And what she does is she's got a picture behind her, and it has the characters from Disney, but it also has Warner Brothers. So she has Disney, Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, but also Bugs Bunny. So the poster's there, and she's asking the person about their recollection of Disneyland, and she prompts the person about Bugs Bunny and did he have a carrot. And she found that people would often bring up characters who weren't there if it was brought up in the context. In other words, here's the list of possibilities, and suddenly it's a possibility where it wasn't before. This is a non sequitur fallacy. It wasn't there before, but since they presented it, it just seemed like it was as valid a response as all the others. That's why I brought up the Bigfoot thing earlier. Like if you're talking about seeing something in the woods and you hear something or you see a tall bipedal hairy creature, is it logical to assume it's a supernatural being that's never been discovered, or is it more likely a being we know to exist that is frequently known to walk on its hind legs? And I'm not trying to offend the Bigfoot believers, but I'm pointing out that there's a logical flaw here in reaching for the supernatural before ruling out everything else first. So what's more likely? Reality retroactively changed, or the interrogator contaminated you, the witness, and interfered with your recollections by presenting new framework, reframing it as an either or. And then this matter is complicated when large numbers of people bring about the social and cognitive reinforcement. So every single YouTube video you see that is pro-Mandela effect will be full of comments of people who either A, don't care, don't know, or believe it altogether. You don't find any coherent deconstructions or debunks. You just have people yes or no, and it's kind of a trivial thing. So they're like, yeah, of course I remember. Reality shifted. It's a little joke. It's not like a serious assertion. It's like, oh, yeah, I saw a ghost. So we have many, many claims. I have John Provost, who explains how Timmy never fell down the well. I have many explanations for all the popular ones. You know, Fruit Loops, Meatloaf. I bring up the question of why the forced binary. And then why do people stick with this? Why do they stick with it when effect after effect has been debunked? You know, prior to 2018, very few people knew that there were actual videos of Ed McMahon with AFP, American Family Publishing, because they didn't do the research. I think there's a shortage of decent researchers in the Mandela effect community. And then what's more, they're held together by the community. And it's almost like the sunk cost fallacy. They just want to stick with this course of action because they're so heavily invested into it. Eventually it's going to pay off. Dave Hazel says, Mandela effect is, without a doubt, a total psyop and part of the hoax system we've all been brought up in. David Pryor says, Johnny Carson's big check says PCH. It does. But when it comes to the assertion of the primacy of their memories as a source, that's fascinating to me because it isn't ruling in the possibility that they could just be wrong. It's like all the F students conspire to say that they are the A students. Oh yeah, we're the actual A students, but the answer's changed. And they are the beneficiaries of the shifting reality. The ones who don't believe it. And then you can just build your community based on that. And much of the argumentation used by the Mandela effect promulgators rests on the supposed authority of collective memory. Is there such a thing as a collective memory? Like, where can I find it? Is it kind of like the internet? Is it just some place we can go and it's objective and we can all source it? Because citing collective memory like everybody knows, everybody remembers, is logically fallacious. And if everybody knows, how come only a small percentage of the population notice? How come commonly misremembered song lyrics aren't included as Mandela effects? History Buried says, Tim, are you saying it's more likely this whole thing is run by a couple goofballs on YouTube? That it's not a military level psyop testing out subliminally implanted memories? Well, I don't think you would need to subliminally implant memories. That's the main thing here. I think you can create the illusion of a discrepancy and a false memory through retroactive eyewitness interference. I think that's all it would take. I think the more likely explanation, the only one that can be verified, the one that can be proven and demonstrated and artificially created, is the one I just brought up. The idea that this had to have been created organically by some nefarious agents, that is sort of a divine fallacy. It's filling in the gaps with something we don't know about, like some magical power, whether it be CERN or Men in Black, and some way to get in everybody's house. I think it's more likely created on the spot. Here's an example. I demonstrated this live. I had someone call in, it was Mac Parhar, who said, I said to him, I was watching A Christmas Story, and there's a scene where they say, you'll shoot your eye out, kid. But I remember it as, you'll shoot your eyes out, kid. Which is it? And he agreed, I don't remember that one, but that's your Mandela effect. So this is how they get started. And if I had a large channel with 5,000 or 10,000 followers, they would all ask their friends, hey, what do you remember? You'll shoot your eye out, kid, or your eyes out, kid. And so they create the illusion of there even being a question. It's not even a question. The discrepancy is an illusion. There is no discrepancy. There is no question. But the popular channel said, don't listen to him. That's a fake Mandela. Why is it fake? I thought reality was infinitely malleable and shifty. No, it only shifts in predetermined ways. Now, again, my explanation for the origin of this thing, I think that it is an op, but I think that it's more or less used by operatives online, perhaps, but also in the movies it's reinforced. It's reinforced, as we've seen, mostly by people. Like, it doesn't need a big group of people creating new ones. There's only a handful. And the ones who are charged with spreading it are like any other limited hangout operatives. You're going to shill for this. You're going to shill for that. Recently, I've been contacted by 9/11 jumper truthers. People who believe 9/11 was a hoax, top to bottom. No planes. Whole thing was fake, except for jumpers are real. And I'm like, wondering, why is that so hard to believe they could fake that? Faking planes, faking jumpers. If they can do one, they can do the other. Thrustazar says, fragile egos have difficulty with admitting fault. Well, I would say this too. Admitting that your memory is wrong is not saying that you're intellectually deficient or your memory is bad at all. And what we're talking about here is, again, the psychological operation here, where, yeah, you can be tricked, and you have to recognize this. Like, this is why people believe the news. They can't believe that the news would lie to them if they're naive, or they can't believe they'd be fooled. They don't want to admit that they've been fooled, and they are fools, and they've been played emotionally and otherwise. They don't know anything. Yeah, that's hard for some people to accept, that you don't have all the answers anymore. Because I don't have all the answers. I ditch a lot of false explanations, but I haven't been able to fill in all those gaps, and I'm fine with it. Okay, let us continue. So the argumentum ad populum is a fallacious argument based on affirming something's real because the majority thinks so. Okay, if you're going to say everybody knows Ed McMahon, then you have to accept everybody knows global warming, everybody knows moon landing, everybody knows consensus reality. So if you're going to say I argue from the consensus, then you're going to have to ditch the Mandela effect and go with the now. As Hitchens said, Christopher Hitchens, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. So Hitchens' razor, much like Occam's razor, would say that you don't even have to address this because there's no evidence. You don't. In fact, we're doing them a favor, as in we're doing those who believe it kind of a favor, I think, just by making them really think about what it is they believe. And I think it's important to admit to yourself, do you believe or no? And there is a difference. If you don't know the difference, if you think you know your beliefs, you're delusional. You can believe things, but if you don't have the facts to back them up, I mean, you could, maybe delusion is a strong word, but it begins to cross that line. Because you have to make a distinction between fact-based knowledge and mere conjecture. And the fact is, the mainstream media is all conjecture. Very little, low on facts. They don't need facts. Facts get in the way of their narratives, if you noticed. They tend to ban those. Actually, facts are now just hate speech. They're using hate speech laws to ban facts, and that should tell you something. Nicholas says, what's your thoughts on quasi-luminous? Didn't he change his name to Saturn? And then Satan? Interesting guy. He said that the center of the world is some kind of whirlpool, and if you jump in, you escape the world of the dead and you achieve immortality. He might have gone there. Last I checked, he was a plumber. So if anybody's going to find that big hole in the center of the universe that you can jump into, it's going to be this guy, quasi-luminous. You know, side note, I was looking at this video that was showing all kinds of fascinating Masonic symbolism in Super Mario Brothers. Marve says implanted memories are real. Well, I'm saying this. Like your memory of Berenstain Bears was implanted the moment you sat down for your Mandela effect memory, or your Mandela effect interrogation. So when you sat down to be interrogated, do you remember this or that? That's when it was created. That's when it was implanted. The person who's saying, do you remember Sex in the City or Sex and the City? At that point, he's using retroactive interference to muddy up whatever you already have in your memories to influence what you're going to say. The Mandela effect is in many ways the gaslighting effect, or the faulty eyewitness testimony effect. Okay, so bottom line, with regards to Hitchens' razor, the person making the claim owns the burden of proof. There is no obligation on behalf of the skeptic to provide evidence to counter these claims. Dilemma. This one is so interesting to me because people will run with this one, but dilemma is very ambiguous. It's been used both ways, but the Latin root of the word dilemma is lemma, L-E-M-M-A. So how would lemma become dilemna, and then reality shifted back to dilemma? Doesn't make sense. Okay, so is the Mandela effect some kind of cognitive sabotage against truthers? Is it just a popular misconception? Does it fall in the category of New Age? Could you lump this in with tarot cards, Ouija boards, and Wicca? When somebody says, I remember, you have to ask them, do you? Do you have a vague recollection or a specific memory? Are you referencing a popular misconception? A personal misconception? And it's all about the context. A major part here is context. With every one of these supposed Mandela effects, if they give you the scene and they frame the question, they've already tainted you as a witness. They've already influenced you. That's what I'm talking about. They never say, hey, did you notice anything weird about that movie, the James Bond movie, Muckraker with Jaws? Did you notice anything weird? They wouldn't jump to and say, well, this person used to have braces. It only gets brought up if you suggest a discrepancy and you point to that specific scene. Luke is told by Darth, Luke, I'm your father. But he says, Luke, something, something, then, no, I'm your father. But the words are there. History Buried says, I was never sat down and interrogated about C-3PO's legs. But did you arrive at that independently? Were you watching Star Wars and you said something changed with his leg? Or did somebody bring it up to you and suggest a discrepancy? Infinite Plane Radio.
Hey, Tim, how's it going? This is David A. Pryor from the chat.
Oh, awesome. So, what's your take on the Mandela effect?
Well, I did state in the chat just recently that I don't know what's causing it, but I do think that it does go beyond misremembering, and it could be a psyop, which is what I thought for a long time. But based on a lot of the stuff that I saw recently or looked into recently, I think it goes beyond a psyop too. I mean, there's just some things that I can't explain, although I'm not saying that I have an explanation either.
But the basic premise here is that reality shifts in the past, like things change from the past. And so that's the basic premise here. Did this pre-exist the Mandela effect and it just got labeled as such, in your opinion?
Oh, that could definitely be. I mean, it's a presupposition, but like say we do live in some kind of editable matrix and say, time only exists within this matrix, then whoever created this would be outside of time. So if they're editing our matrix, they could edit, the present, the future, the past. I'm not saying that's what's going on, but I'm just saying, I'm open to the possibility of that.
So why would reality shift be a better explanation for GIF or Jiffy than some of the more conventional and mundane explanations? Like, why would we reach to the supernatural when there are more mundane things?
Well, that one I don't have an opinion on. I remember Skippy and Jiff, but like, it would probably be better if we used an example that resonated with me,
Yeah, please. Which one resonates with you the most?
Well, I brought it up in the chat earlier too, but let's take like the C-3PO one, for instance. So I was always a huge Star Wars fan. I collected the action figures. I had the posters. I just, as far as my memory is concerned, C-3PO always had it, it was all gold. And you can go back to the earliest VHS tape of it, and he will have that silver leg from the, knee down. So, could that be some kind of, brainwashing psyop type of thing? Yes. But one thing I looked into when I was researching this was I found a lot of spiritual messages. And like I noted, he's not missing his golden leg. He's missing it from the knee down, which is the calf. And from the story of Moses, the people were worshiping the false idol of the golden calf. And this is basically a spiritual message about the removal of that idol. And Star Wars would be, the biggest movie idol. And this is just theory, but I think there's something to it because there's a lot of spiritual messages to a lot of these changes. I don't know if you want to go over some other ones.
Yeah, I would like to. On that one, have you heard the conventional explanations for why people had a conception of his leg having been gold instead of silver? Have you heard the explanations?
Yeah,
that don't...
actually got me to dismiss it too, because I heard about this change a long time ago. I totally dismissed the Mandela effect and thought it was a psyop and all that.
What I
But
mean is, like someone said that the reason why you might have thought his leg was gold the whole time
yeah,
is that the
reflecting the
silver was
sand.
reflecting the sand, and that it's not clearly cut and dry. But like, that's one possible explanation, and I think even one of the cameramen had an explanation. But what do you make of those?
Well, it's an explanation for when he's on the sands, but like when he's in the ships and when he's in the green forests, it's a pretty obvious silver leg. So if it's always been that way, you'd also have to jump to a conclusion that millions, if not a billion or more, Star Wars nerds for 50 years or whatever, they make like fan fiction about like Darth Vader's buttons and like what his serial number on his cape is and all this crap. Like, so like no one ever talked about or wrote about how C-3PO got a silver leg, like how his leg got damaged or whatever.
Okay, well, I don't have a recollection specific to that one, but let's go to the other one. Luke, I'm your father. Is that, in your view, consistent with Mandela effects? Is that a consistent reality shift where it went from Luke, I'm your father to no, I'm your father?
Well, there is, like I said, with the actors, you can see both James Earl Jones, who is directly quoting the script. He's saying, when I first looked at the script and it said, Luke, I am your father, he thought such and such. So he's not just like saying it, he's like thinking about the time that he first read the script. And then you can also see Mark Hamill saying it, but that's in a more haphazard way.
And Chris Farley. Chris Farley, too.
Right, that's true. Yeah, Tommy Boy. But I also think that might have a spiritual message because, Luke, it's like short for Lucifer. And it's also got to do with his father.
Sure. Yeah, that scene is very interesting. You have Luke, kind of archetype, sun king, sun god. You have Darth Vader, kind of Saturnian. And the severing of the sword hand is very consistent with the killing of the Sun King in all the myths. But in the scene itself, he does use the name Luke. And then Luke says something. And when you're talking to somebody, you don't say their name at the beginning of every single sentence. But he says Luke, sure. Luke says something, and then he says, no, I'm your father. So it's a reply. And then he says Luke again. So if you look at the entire scene, it wouldn't make sense for him to say, Luke, I'm your father, because he already said Luke a sentence before that. However, if you're going to relay the scene to anybody, anywhere, if you say, no, I'm your father, like if I see you on a bus and I look over to you and I say, no, I'm your father, it's going to make you mad. But if I say, Luke, I'm your father, you'll know who I'm talking about. So I think it's paraphrasing.
I understand, but I could also say that it makes sense from a writing standpoint that when you're delivering that momentous, I am your father, that, it's more powerful to use your son's name in that sentence. But
he does, he does 2 seconds before. That's what I'm saying.
Sure.
He does. Like in the scene, he makes it very clear. And then, no, I'm your father is very impactful. He didn't have to say Luke, but when Chris Farley was saying, Luke, I'm your father through the fan in that Tommy Boy movie, his statement would have made no sense at all. You wouldn't have thought Darth Vader without Luke.
There's another interesting piece of evidence, though. I don't know if you're aware of it. There's a book for like The Empire Strikes Back, like how they write, books after famous movies. Like you can go buy like the Alien book or whatever. In that book, they like directly quote each line of dialogue, and it says, "No, Luke, I am your father," in the book. I'm just saying that's another piece of evidence.
I would need to see a screen cap and find out if it was what the script actually says too. But in the way that it was edited, there was a few seconds of a pause, and so when the Mandela effect interrogator brings it up to you, he's not going to bring you the whole scene and say, does this conflict with what you remember? He's going to show you that soundbite. And you're going to say, no, he said Luke. Well, he did say Luke, just not in the soundbite they gave you. I can give you another similar example. Tom Green was talking to Ed McMahon. And he says, so Ed McMahon, you handed out big checks. And Ed McMahon said, yeah, I did. And then people say, look, there's proof. But then, if you go back to the interview, 30 seconds later, he says, yeah, me and Dick Clark. So if Ed McMahon passed out checks with Dick Clark, then he did not work for Publishers Clearinghouse. That right there conclusively links him in with American Family Publishing. But The
But
Mandela
you could
effect.
say the same the other way too.
No, no.
There's evidence in both ways.
Is there evidence Dick Clark worked for Publishers Clearinghouse?
No, but when Johnny Carson goes on David Letterman, he
No,
has a
but
Publishers
if
Clearinghouse
Dick
check.
if Dick Clark did not work for Publishers Clearinghouse, then everything's been debunked because Ed McMahon, from his own mouth to Tom Green, said, "Me and Dick Clark." But the people who spread the Mandela effect will never play the entire clip. They
Oh,
crop
I
that out.
agree.
So
I'm
why
not
would you?
trying to support any of those channels.
But why would they crop out something that debunks the Ed McMahon story? Why would they crop it out?
Unfortunately, I think it's the nature of a lot of people to dismiss any contrary evidence. But that's why I think the Mandela effect is so fascinating, because I researched it a lot, and I know I'm not an idiot or something. Maybe people in the chat think that, but I know that I researched it enough to the point where there should be an answer, and there's just not an answer. There's just too much evidence to the contrary. Like there's interviews with people and Ed McMahon where they talk about Publishers Clearinghouse. So like, shouldn't he have a contract that says like in public he has to correct people? Like he's just like standing there and agreeing with them, and they're all going along with the joke that he works for Publishers Clearinghouse. So like there's
Right.
video evidence to prove both ways.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Specifically, the Tom Green one, he mentions Dick Clark, and that one doesn't get a lot of play. And so
I
that would
agree.
contradict. Okay, another one. Did Timmy fall down the well? Because everybody knows he did. Did Timmy fall down the well? All the leading Mandela effectees remember it. Are you on team Timmy fell down the well?
No, that one doesn't affect me at all. I think that you have an explanation for it, and I think that some might be implanted in this. I mean, we might be dealing with like 3 or 4 different things at once here, because obviously there is mismemory.
No,
I
but
think there is some kind of
the
psyop
author of the
element.
book Timmy in the Well, John Provost,
Oh
who
no,
played Timmy, he specifically says it. He explains, no, it never happened. That's why I made the title.
sure,
It was
but
to be ironic. So, if you have the very source of the discrepancy saying it's not so, do we just ignore what they said and go with the confusion?
no, I would go with him. I don't find that to be a very compelling Mandela effect or whatever.
I guess another important point here, though, is that they all have explanations. And so if half of them are debunked or discredited or have better explanations, then why is it still considered to be a viable explanation if it's wrong in most of the instances that I can find? And there's another one. There's a movie called, well, I think it was kind of a comedy on Scream, and it was sort of a parody of the Scream series. I gotta find out what it was called. It had the Wayans brothers. Anyway, there was a supposed discrepancy over whether this guy talks about his strong hand or his good hand.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so that goes around as something of, it's called Scary Movie. Was it his good hand or his strong hand?
Scary movie too.
Well, it
Yeah.
turns out he says both in 2 different scenes. So are we going to go with reality shift, or people have been given a false framework for answering the question? Hey, was it this or that? Because if it was this, reality shifted instead of maybe
Yeah.
it's both.
I've never seen that movie, so that's not really a big one for me either. And like I said, I think some of these are put out there to throw people off the scent, maybe. But I do have some examples though that I think they make a pretty interesting case. You know, it would be reality being edited by someone. I don't know who's doing it, but I don't know if you're interested to hear some of these.
Yeah, sure. What are some of the ones that you find compelling or and worth looking into?
Well, I brought up the C-3PO one. One that I'm pretty sure of was, so this sounds dumb at first, but Shaggy from Scooby-Doo doesn't have an Adam's apple anymore. And I watched Scooby-Doo a bunch when I was little, and I remember him having like an Adam's apple with like a couple hairs, you know, sticking out of it. So that's gone, and it might sound dumb, but then it's an Adam's apple, you know, so there's a spiritual message there. It's the removal of Adam's apple. You
Oh,
see what I'm saying?
that's interesting. And so you remember Shaggy as having a pronounced Adam's apple in the in the children's cartoon when you were a kid, and that's an ME. Now I remember he had the goatee thing. I remember he ate sandwiches that were really huge, and it would make his throat go fat when he swallowed these things. But I don't
Well,
know
yeah,
if,
when he swallowed, the Adam's apple would go up and down.
well, I remember the sandwich going down his throat. Not sure if I remember specifically an Adam's apple, but but if he doesn't have one now, and we remember him as having had one, then we are, of course, seeing a Mandela effect. This one doesn't resonate with me. I'm looking at pictures of Shaggy. I do remember his scraggly goatee thing, but not sure. Interesting though. But the Adam's
Sure.
apple thing being a biblical reference is interesting.
I feel like there's a pattern. Like one of the big ones for people, it's not one for me, but in Jaws, people say it's, we're going to need a bigger boat, or you're going to need a bigger boat. But the issue aside of which is which, to me, that's like a Noah's Ark reference. Like, you're going to need a bigger boat. Like another movie that got changed is Tom Cruise no longer has sunglasses when he does like the underwear dance in Risky Business.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Do you remember where you were when you watched Tom Cruise dancing in his underwear? Were you at home on the couch?
It's not one. It's not even.
No, but
It's not one for me.
or were you in the movie theater? Where were you when you first saw Tom Cruise in his underwear?
I never saw it. Well, what I'm presenting to you is my research of what other people are calling Mandela effects, and how I'm noticing a consistent spiritual message through a lot of them. Whether or not you think that it's a reality change or not, I think there's something to it.
So
And
yeah,
I think there's more
what's the
than-
one with that one? Because so the Mandela effect is that Tom Cruise had sunglasses, underwear, and socks on, and he danced in front of the stairs. What was the song?
I'm telling you that I never even saw the movie.
Okay. So the idea though is that he didn't have sunglasses, and that's a reality shift. And the reason I asked for specifics is if you're citing a supposed reality shift and you haven't experienced it yourself, then you're citing a popular misconception or a reality shift that you don't take part in. So it's interesting to
No,
me.
I'm just saying
But,
it's
but
a Mandela effect that people claim is a Mandela effect.
now what's the subtext to this effect though? Because this is interesting.
Well, the name of the movie is Risky Business. So if someone is editing reality, it's a risky business.
Right. Well, I've never seen it and I don't know the scene.
Sure.
But like I don't specifically remember it, and that's why I can't say I remember it. But I do know there's a
Like,
discrepancy because whenever people impersonate Tom Cruise, they wear glasses. And they wear
sure.
glasses because of Top Gun and stereotyping. So if you're going to
Well, he's got
impersonate,
sunglasses on the cover of Risky Business.
right,
The cover of the movie, he's got sunglasses.
exactly. So the character of Tom is big grin and sunglasses. And so that when somebody impersonates him and they dress up like him and they do the risky business dance, it makes sense they would put sunglasses on. It doesn't mean reality shift or
Yeah,
the
I'm not trying to defend whether it's
no,
a
no,
real effect.
but my point being though is that people are saying because I remember it this way, it used to be that way.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of evidence again, though, because you could see a ton of Halloween costumes where all these girls, it's typically a girl costume, they dress up, with the shirt and the sunglasses and all that. So,
Now, is that residue, evidence, or a popular misconception? Like, for example, there's a supposed Mandela effect that Britney Spears had a plaid schoolgirl type of skirt on, but was black. Now, I don't know the
sure.
video, but apparently she had that. And so, when you look at
Well,
costumes,
that actually ties into some stuff. I'm not saying I care about that music video though, but the thing where it's like painting things black, because that's another supposed change, is the Rolling Stones song. It doesn't say I want to paint it black anymore. It says I wanted painted black. I'm not a big Rolling Stones fan either, so I'm not saying that's a change, but I'm saying that Mandela effect people say it's a change, and turning things black seems to be a consistent
well,
thing.
I would say this though.
Like,
But look, one, most school uniforms, contrary to the popular stereotypes, aren't the plaid when it comes to Catholic schools. And in the video, it wasn't. But in subsequent appearances, she wore plaid. When Eminem dressed up as Britney Spears, he wore plaid. But again, to read anything into it, as in paint it black, you're going off of a supposed Mandela effect that doesn't even affect you. And if you didn't sit down and watch Britney Spears in that skirt,
yeah, but there's
then,
more than just Britney Spears.
well, I mean, but look, you didn't see Britney Spears in that skirt, so you can't reference that as an actual miracle that you've experienced. It'd be like me
Well,
trying
another
to,
interesting
I'm not
thing,
going to try to argue for the existence of God based on other people's sightings of angels. Like, that's not good evidence. And I'm saying that the Mandela effect is coming off as the miracle effect, where I may not have experienced this, but a lot of people have. That's another ad populum. Everybody knows Timmy fell down the well. I don't know it, but everybody else does.
Yeah, but
So
you're misrepresenting what I'm saying.
no, I'm not. I'm representing the Mandela effect accurately as people portray it.
Right. I'm just saying what people are saying about the Mandela effect. I'm talking about patterns within that. Like, you could think the Mandela effect's fake. There's still a pattern here.
Well, okay, then what's the pattern
Yeah.
in Kit Kat no longer having a hyphen? What's the pattern in that? You know, what's so many of them are so trivial that
Sure.
you can't say
Well,
it's super profound when most of them are obviously just trivial. And again, the inconsistencies are what continually stand out at me. Where are the
so you're talking
recipients?
about a logo, right?
Like the Ford logo changing. What's the
No, no.
significance of that?
But what's the other definition for the word logos? There's something there.
Why don't you define? Well, because we're talking about not only logos but slogans, jingles. But sure.
Sure.
But are you saying that the word logos itself is of because the logos plural logos, not logos? You're
Right,
talking.
but logos means the word of God. Another definition.
Well, it means speech
Sure, whatever.
or discourse. It doesn't specifically mean guy in the clouds with a beard, judging us.
No,
And
I'm not saying that.
so, I mean, I don't know if that's strong evidence in favor of the Mandela effect. Candy wrappers has no significance. But again, I'm thinking that we're looking here at memories that are being created through
Well,
retroactive
do you know the
interference.
song the Billy Joel Piano Man? That's a pretty big song.
No, why don't you fill me in?
Well, that changed from play me a melody to play me a memory. So right there, that's a message. I'm not saying I know what the answer to all these messages are either, but it's pretty weird to have a change with the word memory in it. And like play me a memory, that sounds ridiculous.
So which ones are real though, I guess? Like which
I don't,
ones?
I
I mean, I
don't
can't
know.
I can't point to any, and reality shifting hasn't been demonstrated to my satisfaction. But what we have are you got a group of 1 million people, 5% believe this one, 5% believe that one, and so it's kind of a mix. There's not a consistent theory here. There's not a consistent explanation, but what is
Sure.
consistent is nobody knows what causes it. Nobody knows, but they all believe it. So they're all believers in something they don't have an explanation for. So this puts it in the realm of more like mysticism to me than actual observed. Like this isn't in the same realm as media deconstruction. This isn't proving 9/11 was a hoax. This is, I think, more of a spiritual
Well,
thing.
I'd actually argue with you on that because you can't prove that Alex Jones is Bill Hicks. Now, I think that he is, but you still can't prove it 100%.
Well, actually,
In
you
the same,
could.
like,
You could if you put him, if you had him in a chair, gun to his head, or if you went in his house and you got the paperwork, if you found the contracts. If he is that, there's physical evidence in the world that you're not privy to, but it's there. It's
yeah, but
provable.
there's physical evidence for these changes. Like, why
Where?
does Johnny Carson have a PCH check?
Well, is that physical evidence of a change? I guess that's the question. Is that physical evidence of an actual reality shift? Is that a prop from another dimension? So if that's true, then it's true that Ed McMahon used to pass out checks, which is contradicted by Dick Clark. So is Dick Clark a liar?
I mean, they're probably all liars. I don't know.
My point is that these effects are too internally contradictory for one. I mean, if one cancels out another, so if Ed McMahon's did not work
Well,
for
that's my
look,
point,
if
too.
Dick Clark and Ed McMahon worked together, then the thing at Johnny Carson's was a misconception, a prop, some kind of a joke, but it wasn't evidence of a reality shift. And that's the big leap we're making. Are we looking at?
But there's several. Like when he shows up on Roseanne with the big check, the whole audience laughs. Like, why would the audience laugh if Ed McMahon shows up at her doorstep with a big check? Like, there's no joke there. It doesn't make any sense.
What did they say specifically? Publishers Clearinghouse?
No, not on that one. But he did have a big check at the doorstep.
But if he didn't specifically say Publishers Clearinghouse, were they inferring that or American Family Publishing? Because again,
No, but it's irrelevant because he didn't deliver big checks for American Family Publishing.
I have videos of him delivering checks for American Family
Did he do his
Publishing.
doorstep?
Well, actually, we don't have him doing it on the doorstep. I think we have we have.
Yeah, that's the memory of
I,
people's doorsteps.
I mean,
I did
actually,
see
no.
the
Actually,
chunk of
wait.
American.
Look, in the documentary, I have videos of Ed McMahon in somebody's house with Dick Clark, in their house.
Yeah, the thing was the doorstep though. Like that was what I remember. Like he showed up at people's doorsteps with a big check, and they all went crazy.
But again, if you're, the whole point is Ed McMahon never worked for Publishers Clearinghouse
Yeah, I know.
because he worked for Dick Clark, unless you're calling him a liar.
Well, or someone's editing our reality.
Yeah, that's the other side of it. Someone's editing our reality, but why would it have inserted a contradiction after the fact? Like, so it used to be this way, it didn't be this way, and then so Ed McMahon didn't know reality changed?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he made a song, yeah, about like how like that rap song in the car where he goes around collecting the big checks that he never gave out.
Yeah, I'm familiar with a lot of the parodies, and parodies are the reason for a lot of these things. Like I mentioned earlier about
But he's in the
if
parody.
you build it, they will come. Is that a Mandela effect to you?
Well, Kevin Costner gets that one wrong too, and he's the star. Like, so you'd have to say that Kevin Costner doesn't know the biggest line from one of his biggest movies. Like, it's pretty weird.
Or like I said before,
Or he's on the side.
This has been appropriate, just like with Luke, I'm your father. In order for the sentence to make sense in a conversation taken out of context, you have to change it from shoeless Joe Jackson to they will come. Because if you build
Well,
it, it's like if I'm trying to inspire you to start a business, I'll say if you build it, shoeless Joe Jackson will come. Makes no sense. He will come. But in the way that it's been used popularly, it becomes they will come. That's how it's been popularly appropriated. So the appropriation requires a change because it's out of context and it requires a little bit of an adjustment, but that's not a reality shift. It's like when you tell jokes, you're not
but
recollecting a
you have to
story
say that Kevin
verbatim.
Costner. So your opinion though is that Kevin Costner doesn't know one of his most famous lines.
No, my opinion is that you're reading too much into him recontextualizing the famous line that has been appropriated by popular culture and used
Maybe,
to
maybe.
convey a message that the film also conveyed about the Field of Dreams. It's inspirational message. But if he had changed it from they to he, it wouldn't make sense. So it's about context.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems weird to me that he would say the quote wrong, but I agree that it's possible that he just says it wrong for some reason.
Well, it depends on look, if I look you like again one more time, if I look some random stranger in the eye or a friend and I say, "No, I'm your father," quoting the
No, I
movie,
understand.
it makes no sense as a joke. But if I want to make him laugh and I speak through a fan like Chris Farley and I say, "Luke, I'm your father," now it's a joke. It's succinct. It makes uh, no confusion. There's no kind of ambiguity. If I'm saying, "Luke, I'm your father," I'm Darth Vader. If I say,
Sure, but
"No,
some
I'm
of
your
them are
father,"
easy
then I'm
to.
questioning your own father and whether I was not a more important figure in your mother's life. So it's about context.
Sure, I mean, it's easier to debunk some than others. You know, like the fruit of the loom one, I think is a difficult one to debunk because, like, why would everyone just remember a cornucopia? You know, because I have a distinct memory of the cornucopia, and then if you think about the meaning of that, it means plenty. So we're most likely, headed into a, less than plenty situation in this world. So I think that's another spiritual message. Plus, I think Jesus is referred to as the fruit of the womb. So here you have the fruit of the loom logo changing. So it's another spiritual message, if that's what it is.
Oh yeah, well the fruit of thy womb is part of the prayer. What is it? The
Right, yeah, the
apostles
Hail
thing.
Mary.
But yeah, Psalm 127, the fruit of the womb is a reward. So it's not specifically about him, but that could be a reference. But now, when you say
It's just an interesting
you
logo.
remember there was a cornucopia in your underwear, like what was your recollection? Folding your laundry? Was it on the bag? Was it on the commercial?
I mean, I guess both. But there is an interesting other thing. There's a music album. You can check the album art for. It's called "Flute of the Loom," and it looks just like the Fruit of the Loom logo with the cornucopia. And the artist was asked, why did he make it like that? And he said the only thing he used as a reference was the logo on his T-shirt. So like he's got this big, flute-looking thing that looks like a cornucopia in the back, and it just makes no sense if that was never there.
Now, my main thing is I don't find anybody who believes in all of them. I don't. I find people
Yes,
who believe in
weird.
some of them. I don't find a lot of agreement. And so when you so like if you remove the ones that aren't true for you and the ones that aren't true for this guy and the ones that aren't true for this guy, eventually there's none left.
Well, you can go the other way too, though. You could add up the ones that are true for people, and eventually you get all of them.
But when we get into the ones that are true, these are the ones that don't stand up to scrutiny. Like anybody who my Mandela faith rests upon the Ford logo didn't have a swirly before. Like if that's your effect that you swear by, I have a debunk you can't fight. If you swear on Ed McMahon's big checks, I'm saying Ed McMahon is basically Santa Claus. It's a new
And
myth.
I've listened to all your stuff. I know about the Thomas Edison thing and all that.
But before I explained that, a lot of people said, "Oh, this one's it for me." So it's almost like grasping on straws, and people are the Mandela effect's on its last leg. A lot of the effects people used to call up are no longer brought up. The Chick-fil-A, like people are like, nope, I'm pretty sure Chick-fil-A didn't have a K. Well, turn your little French fry box 90 degrees. The K's right there.
Yeah, that was never. I've actually never been to a Chick-fil-A.
So I guess the bottom line for me though is Mandela effect the best explanation for these various discrepancies? Are these
But it doesn't have an
discrepancies
explanation.
caused by the same thing?
But it isn't an explanation. Like I don't think there is an explanation yet because I think it goes beyond memory, and I think that there's enough evidence of other. There's enough evidence of the misremembered things to go beyond. It would be a pretty complicated psyop. I mean, they'd have to be using
Okay,
some
well,
serious.
you ever heard of misremembered song lyrics? Is that a
Sure.
or dilemma? You know how many people commonly misspelled words? Now, is that a conspiracy? Did somebody mess with half their minds and implant false memories so they misspelled words? Or are we dealing with just common misperceptions, popular misconceptions?
Well, here's an interesting one. Do you know about the Gordon Ramsay one?
No, familiarize me. Who's Gordon Ramsay? I mean, the name stands out to
He's
me.
like a really popular chef.
Okay, the chef.
He's got all
I
the
remember a chef
restaurants.
named, but what about him?
Well, so his name now, this apparently happened a few months ago, if you want to believe that, but his name now is Ramsay. So like everyone calls him Gordon Ramsay, and I remember it being SEY, but now it's SAY.
Okay, have you
And
watched his TV
it's
show?
weird.
Have you watched his TV show?
Yeah.
What's it called?
Um, I mean, you put me on the spot. I don't know. I've passed by his restaurants and things and gone to his restaurant. I mean, he's got one called Burger.
But I mean, if you haven't watched his show specifically,
Well, his
maybe you
name is
never heard
weird.
it right.
Well, there's like several Gordon Ramsay restaurants like in my area. Like there's one near me called Burger. You know.
Now, is it Ramsay or Ramsey? Is that which is the right one? Because see, I wouldn't know, but I'm saying here is that you may not be distinguishing between vague
Oh, but I
recollection.
was going to go somewhere else with that too. So right around that time, apparently, and like I'm not saying anything concrete here either,
Oh,
but
look,
right around the
wait, he's
time,
British. They say it differently. He's British.
sure, but that coincided with Justin Bieber getting like that Ramsay sickness. So if you want to like go into that rabbit hole, you could say that they noticed the change, so they came up with some fake problem for Justin Bieber to get out in front of it, to put the word Ramsay out in the news, so that when people saw that, they go to Justin Bieber's articles instead of anything about Gordon Ramsay.
Well, I think what we're looking at here is more than likely the mislabeling of vague recollections as specific memories. And I also came across something very interesting having to do with another activist during apartheid who was killed in 1977. And he was sort of I guess you would say, a contemporary to Nelson Mandela. And I was looking at some of the pictures of this individual, and I could see how people might conflate the two. And I'll be bringing this up in the documentary, but there are reasons I think for people recalling groups of memories, and then when prompted, the retroactive interference gets them to agree that they actually have a memory when they don't. And so, again, I think that we have to distinguish between actual memories and vague recollection. So if you didn't actually go to Gordon Ramsay or Ramsay's restaurant, or if you did, I mean, sorry, if you didn't actually watch his TV show and hear his name pronounced, if you didn't use his name, maybe you don't have a specific memory.
I mean, you could say that about, your first car or something. Like, you could say like, you can question the memory of anything, really. I'm saying it's like beyond
But I
memory. Like
have
what
first
this
memories.
is,
I have a memory of my first car. I don't have a memory of Gordon Ramsay's name, so if it changed, I wouldn't know. I don't have a specific memory. When somebody says everybody knows Timmy fell down the well, you can't include me in everybody. So
well, you
every
saw Star Wars, right? I mean, did C-3PO have a silver leg
I
when you watched it?
look, it's a big screen. I'm looking at all kinds of things, and I draw, I paint, I do a lot of art. And if you sit down, even right now, you sit down and you try to draw a familiar object from memory without it in front of you for reference, it's not going to come that easily. And so
Well, to counter that though, what about the people at Kenner who made the action figures? They were looking extremely closely at C-3PO and all the other people to get all their colors right, and they just made them all gold. They were definitely artists who were staring at C-3PO.
were there any other specific details they omitted? Because a lot of times cartoons, comics, and toys are simplified versions. For example, globes. Look at globes in the cartoons. Are they ever consistent with reality? Are you a believer that South America should be called Southeast America because it's no longer directly south? Do you think South America moved?
Well, that's definitely different from my memory.
But was your memory founded on an actual memory? Did you go up really high and see the two continents? What was your
Well, no,
memory?
obviously not the memory of the maps, but you can't find a map with that old memory.
I
That's
can.
the issue.
The risk board, and I notice on a lot of cartoons and a lot of
Oh,
stylized
sure, sure.
representations of the globes that you'll be seeing when you're a kid. Yeah, it's always North and then South America right below it. So there are reasons you might come to these recollections. Even this, like the human skull. I don't think you've ever held a real skull or seen one without its flesh, but you've seen stylized representations. So when you see the real thing, or you look in an anatomy book and you find, okay, there's more holes, it's a little different than I thought. These aren't reality shifts. These are upset expectations.
What do you think about Japan though? Because that's actually a bigger one for me. So that looks crazy to me.
So what's the Japan Mandela effect?
Well, if you picture like where Japan is in relation to China and the Koreas, I don't know if you want to go through it, but it's not where I remembered it being. I definitely looked at it on maps, several times.
So again,
'Cause it's so far off.
but I'm glad that you're able to say, when you say you remember, like I remember South America moved, at least you're not saying that you saw the land, that you had a position to see it, you had a God's eye view. So you weren't in a position to see it. So now you're referencing printed materials. And now, can you tell me specifically, did you have a map on your wall as a kid? Was there a textbook you can cite? Or is this a generalized collection of recollections?
But see, I don't think it would matter because, like, let's say I did have a globe and a map on my wall, you would still not believe it.
Well, I think that we have discrepancies and misconceptions and wrong answers all the time. And it's a matter of necessity. It's a matter of necessity how much attention you pay anything. And some things are so trivial. Like who cares about Kit Kat and whether it had a hyphen? But if it changed,
Well, that's another pattern there.
it's a huge
I
deal,
mean,
obviously.
because it seems like dashes, because like the Etch a Sketch, for instance, that no longer has dashes, similar to the Kit Kat. So I mean, that's weird to me. I'm pretty positive that had dashes. I had an Etch a Sketch.
I had an Etch a Sketch too, but I can't say affirmative. Like I remember it had the white knob on the left and the right. You can only
Well, the
go
logo.
right angles. But do I recall the logo? I think it was a single piece of plastic, and I don't remember if it had hyphens or not. Like I don't know enough to
The
where I
hyphens make sense though with the product because the hyphens connect the words. You know what I mean?
well,
Like, why wouldn't they?
well, it's an unbroken line, so it wouldn't be a hyphen. But I don't think that I can
But that's
say
when you type it.
I don't think I can say my memory there is firm enough that I'm willing to call reality a liar and say
Oh
reality
no, I'm just
shifted.
saying that there's patterns. I don't know if you're recognizing the patterns because you're really good with patterns. I learned a ton from you
Sure.
about all kinds of
Yeah,
stuff.
I am interested in this. Like, I find it very intriguing that the main Mandela effects are Ed McMahon and Nelson Mandela, a guy who died and came back from the dead, and
Yeah,
another
that's
guy
crazy.
who's like a contemporary Santa Claus. Like, I
And
think,
he includes Son of Man, Nelson Mandela. So Son of Man, Jesus dying, being reborn.
yeah, there's that, which adds a spiritual kind of component to it. And then if you look at the designs, the Mandela patterns and designs, uh, that's kind of indicative when you get into the idea of, reality shifting and fractals. You find designs like this, geometric designs. What do you call it when you get into sacred geometry? So even the name Mandela falls into that body of ideas. So like I can understand the intrigue and all of that, and none of it seems accidental from that
I
perspective.
think it's
Sure.
pretty fascinating. I'm like I've been saying, I don't know what it is exactly, but there's enough there for it to be like a really interesting, research topic. And I know that you know that obviously,
Oh
but
yes, I mean that's why we're putting time into this. And my best explanation has to do with retroactive interference and more or less people wanting to believe. But people are free to arrive at their own conclusions, and the documentary isn't going to be definitive for people who have their own explanations. But hopefully, it's a starting
yeah,
point.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, even though I might disagree with it now, I definitely am looking forward to it because I know you'll have a lot to add.
And if
But
not,
I do.
look, yeah, and if nothing else, it will enlighten people as to the workings of their memories and the importance of knowing the difference between belief and knowledge, specific memories, and vague recollections. You have to be honest with yourself if you're going to be a witness. Are you a perceiver, a believer? Are you a credible witness or not?
That's all I'm trying to do. I do have a couple other examples if you're interested. I could just run through them real quick of the spiritual messages.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Well, so one of the movies that apparently had the main quote removed in Silence of the Lambs, he no longer says "Hello, Clarice," apparently, and "Silence of the Lambs." There's a Bon Jovi song where the line is changed. It's only something like "Only the names have changed." It's all the same, only the names have changed. But that's very similar to what's going on with the Mandela effect. Is reality just kind of goes on and everything's still the same, but like, apparently names are changing. There's a band called 10 Years After, and they had a song called "I'd Love to Change the World," which is apparently now "I Love to Change the World," which is another Mandela effect message about changing the world. Apparently, "Beam Me Up, Scotty" was never said in Star Wars. However that came about, to me, that's like a rapture message. There's like the famous Eagles, Hotel California, that changed to, it used to be "This could be heaven" or "This could be hell," and now it's "This could be heaven and this could be hell." It's another spiritual message. Like "I Love Lucy," apparently Ricky never says "Lucy, you got some splaining to do." But again, like Luke, if Lucy is short for Lucifer, it's like, Lucifer doesn't have any explaining to do anymore. He's just doing whatever he wants, if that's what's going on. Like in Footloose, it says, instead of "kick off your Sunday shoes," it says "kick off the Sunday shoes." That's another spiritual message. The movie Castaway apparently used to be one word, and now it's two words. So it went from castaway to cast away. So that is another spiritual message. Tinker Bell. It used to be apparently one word, Tinkerbell, and apparently it's even the character is even copyrighted as one word, but now it's two words. But if you look at like time, bells are often associated with time, and they're tinkering with the bell. It's another message.
These are all pretty good. I will include this narrative. I'll include this as an explanation in the doc for these things being connected. Do you think CERN has anything to do with it?
I certainly don't think they're sitting there editing reality. They may be doing something to our reality to create a way for Satan to change things. I mean, I really don't. I know that they inserted themselves into the conversation when the one scientist wore the Bond #1 Mandela or whatever signs on his neck. So like they want to be in the conversation, but I don't think that they're sitting at a quantum computer programming this. I think it's beyond that. If we're in an editable matrix, then whoever has the ability to edit it, it's not humans.
Right. Well, part of it includes physical changes to the body, changes to anatomy. So anatomy changes puts it in a completely different realm. But these are all things that have been brought up. Again, I'm still more inclined to accept a mundane explanation Occam's razor, Hitchens' razor,
Yeah, it's
then
understandable. Yeah.
then a leap to the supernatural. But as far as who would be behind it, could it be done organically? Well, I do think you could manufacture it. I could make up Mandela effects, and with enough of a consensus, perhaps I think it could be organically created in that sense. But
You know, they can deep fake and edit the internet at will, but then there is evidence that goes beyond the internet. So
right, because it's analog, and that's the thing. You find stuff on eBay, people purport to be evidences of shifting residue, is what they would call it. But you also have typos and misprints.
yeah, and I think that there's evidence with that Dolly Braces scene that no Mandela effect channel ever wants to talk about because it doesn't fit into their paradigm. But like there's several. So like I played the VHS tape and made pictures and video for people, including you. And I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the Mandela effect pushers. But there's also a couple of videos on YouTube of people putting in the exact same VHS tape into their VCR and watching it, and they don't notice the thing that happens, but you can see it in the video that white line goes right over her mouth for like 2 frames. So that's proof of editing. So even if they are editing our reality, it's more akin to like a deep fake type of thing where they went in and somehow removed the braces, or there's something there. Like there's no way a big white line is going to appear where braces supposedly should have been in a big budget James Bond movie. Like I'm just saying it's something to
Now,
note.
is that consistent in the entire film of Moonrakers? Not just the one scene where she smiles at Jaws, but throughout the movie, is there this
I'm thinking
consistent
about
idea
that
that
editing.
you haven't? It's because I think you'd have to watch the whole movie and look at every smile to ascertain whether or not she had braces. Because I think isolating that one scene and taking it out of context creates the misconception of a discrepancy.
Yeah, but with deepfakes, that could be easily altered.
Yeah, well, the question of fakeability is important. And is it fakeable? Yes. Is it fakeable on that wide of a scale?
Yeah,
Possibly.
exactly.
And then the other question is, why are there qualitative differences between these different effects? Some are physical to the body, some are geographical, some are logos, and some are words. So not all of those could be done by a crafty editing department, couldn't be done by any kind of men in black like human agency. So you couldn't even classify them all as the same category of reality shifts. So they're either all being caused by whoever's changing the bodies of us or the humans that are alive right now, changing us real time, the ones who are moving the land, they would also be the ones controlling everything else. So you have to rule out a human hand, don't you?
I rule out human hands. I also rule out things like time travel and dimensional shifts and things like that, because if those were the cases, then we'd all have consistent memories and there wouldn't be the residual evidence. So I think it's either an insanely elaborate psyop that is taking advantage of people's mismemories, and it might even be beyond that, or it's editing reality. I mean, if someone can edit reality, then changing the land. I mean, it's like Dark City. Like you wake up in the morning and the whole world is different around you. And our memories just jive with with whatever is new.
Right. Yeah. No, this is not a small thing, and it's not trivial, and it is a very interesting question. So I have another one I brought up earlier that I think it's kind of relevant bringing up again. The lion and the wolf thing is a very popular one, and I was watching some
Hmm.
preacher, and this is in the documentary, where he says in the future the lion will lay down with the lamb, and the swords will be beaten into plowshares, and he listed off a bunch of things. So I did a search, and none of the things he listed were in the Bible verse with the wolf and the lamb. So it seems to me that there are popular expressions and sayings that are attached to Christianity in the music, in the art that aren't specifically biblical. So that's one I don't even think you should classify it as a Mandela effect because everybody remembers Lion and the Lamb because of all the songs. But when somebody comes to you and they say, "Hey, in the book of Isaiah, verse 116, do you remember lion and lamb or lion and wolf?" And of course you remember a lion, not a wolf. But then, understandably
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
But then you look at the verse and it doesn't say that. So you're like, whoa, is a discrepancy. But my question is, did you even learn this from the verse in the first place? And the answer is most likely no.
Sure. There is one Bible one that 'cause I had actually never read the Bible, but I had seen the Lord's Prayer. And I find it interesting, you know, most, I think it's a Mandela effect. I mean, I'm not saying I know what's going on here, but the word trespasses is no longer in the Lord's Prayer. And to me, that was always a big thing, you know, like, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Like, now it's debts and debtors in like every Bible. I mean, that's pretty weird.
Right. I'll have to look at that one because you have on the Bible verses, and then I was in a catechism class where we had the prayer and it was on the board. And I think there were some variations. So I'd have to see because, again, you might memorize lions and lambs from imagery and songs and art on the walls. So it may not specifically be a quote Bible change. And so
I
that's what
did see a pretty interesting piece of evidence for that one though, because this guy had like this 1800s Bible and it had like a ton of paintings on the inside, like really nicely done. And on one page it had the Lord's Prayer in written word, and on the very next page, like when the book was open, it was just the dialogue on the left and the painting on the right. And it's this really intricate painting, and throughout the painting it has all the words from the Lord's Prayer. And the word trespasses was in the painting, but right on the next page, it right next to it, it said debtors. So it's pretty weird.
right, right. And that's what I mean is that when we're getting into Bible changes, we have to ask like, I mentioned how we have body changes. And so it's like, did you talk to a surgeon? You're talking about Bible changes. Well, did you read the Bible cover to cover? What is your education level on it? Have you read the Bible? Can you prove it? Because for you to assert that it changed, it's based on your familiarity with it. And if you haven't read that verse, and can you tell me right now, what is the chapter and verse where this occurred? That way you could refer them to it. Because if you just bring up the popular concept of a future where lions and lambs are buddies, and then you attach it to the verse after, you're kind of
Sure.
creating the perception of a discrepancy. And that's what's so disingenuous about this, is that the way the question is framed seems to be what creates the Mandela effects. That's my take on it still.
In a lot of cases, I do think that the Mandela effect channels, you know, they go about things, you know, not in the way I would. I mean, they just, you know, anything that could possibly throw a wrench into what they're saying, they just ignore. Like, they never bring up, you know, how a parody might not be an exact representation of what was in the movie, you know, stuff like that. And it's like, you at least have to look at, you know, both sides.
Yes. Well, I follow a lot of people who discuss this, and it's an interesting area of discourse. I like to talk about coincidence, synchronicities, patterns. What level of causal agents are we in creation? Are we just observers? It all falls kind of in that category. But when it comes to the people who push the Mandela effect as this explanation, um, I kind of think that the explanation is maybe leading in the right direction, but I think they're ignoring certain important things and they're taking too many things for granted. And that's why I'm doing this documentary. I think that it's easy to leap over more mundane explanations, but I don't think you can do that and call yourself a truther. You enter into the realm of mysticism, and mystics don't have the ultimate explanations, and Mandela affected don't know the cause. So it's not even a
Yeah, I
complete
mean,
theory at this point.
no, I think it's unexplainable. I mean, I think that we should leave the door open for something supernatural to happen. I mean, like, it could happen. You know, we don't have to stay in that boundary. But
Well, okay,
you know, is it
but
100%
though
proven?
this is
No.
the thing though, is it unexplainable? And this is what I'm saying here. Reality's on trial. Has reality been convicted of shifting? And are we just trying to figure out what caused the shifts? And I'm saying no. I'm saying it's not unexplainable. There are explanations, and until you can prove it, you haven't convicted reality of being shifty
But what's the
retroactively.
explanation for C-3PO? Like, I don't think they all can be explained. You'd have to take some big leaps. Like, you'd have to assume that a billion Star Wars nerds never noticed he had a silver leg.
Well, maybe the
Yeah.
initial leap, though, is asserting that there was a discrepancy in the first place. So that's kind of where I'm going at this, is like, is there a discrepancy, or are we asserting there is one? And do the eyewitnesses have the evidence to back it up? And are these eyewitnesses being influenced through retroactive interference? And that's been my contention, is that asking the question creates the perception. This is part of the big trick. This is like stage magic. You have these various parlor tricks where they can get you to ask the right questions, and they'll tell you the card that they're looking at that they can't possibly see. And it's all based on a very calculated way of framing questions and ruling out other possibilities. I think it's a magic trick in some ways.
Well, what's funny is that's another one of the messages. I think there's a song called "It's Magic," and you probably heard it on in like commercials or something, where it's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, it's magic." But now he says something like, "Ho, ho, ho, it's magic," like it's like a Santa Claus type of thing. But I think the reference there would be like, "It's magic." Like that's the spiritual message there, but that would be in that Mandela effect.
I see what you're saying. Okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take everything you brought up, given and what you're giving us here, and I haven't heard this yet, is a deeper underlying, maybe spiritual message contained within these seemingly trivial disparate effects, and you woven it together so that there's some kind of a message here. Adam's apple, magic, the names change,
Oh,
everything.
there's one also, that Jewel song, like "Who Will Save Your Soul." Like I never like was into Jewel, but that song was on all the time, and it was singular, but now it's plural, like "Who Will Save Your Souls." It's another message.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, I am going to include this part in this documentary because, again, my purpose of this is it's not a debunk, and this isn't something that you just quote debunk, because it's part of a bigger area of discourse.
Probably.
The question is this the best possible answer? And I want to know how people are arriving at it. And if you're arriving at an answer for the wrong reasons, even if it's the right answer, but if you're arriving at it through some flawed methodology, maybe you should know. Maybe we should know just how reliable our eyewitness testimony is, because you might find yourself in a position of having to, bear witness or have somebody bear witness, and you could be, mandoozled into being convicted of something you didn't do. And it is an important thing when you get into the Innocence Project and you find out it's very easy by framing questions to get people to answer into a way that doesn't reflect reality, and then they swear by it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's just the goal, is to get to the truth and to not just make any assumptions, but also to keep all the evidence on the table. Because I think a lot of explanations don't account for every piece of evidence, because there's just some things that I think are far fetched in the other direction. Like I think it's far fetched to think that, like think of all the people who dressed up like C-3PO. They had giant like animatronic C-3POs in Disney World. None of that had a silver leg. So there's something going on there.
Right. Well, I'll say this too. I have no kind of qualms with anybody who really believes this thing. I don't. I just think that it's a there are more questions
Oh yeah,
that it
I don't
raises that
mind
haven't been
you.
answered. But I'll say this though, the most Mandela affected person out there is closer to reality than the person who believes what they see on the nightly news. They are a step, they're a leap in the right direction, right?
Well, that's your buddy Brian Staveley. He seems to get a lot of stuff right, but then the Mandela effect is an issue.
Yeah, well, I'm saying like, yeah, I mean, reality shouldn't be subjective. There is an objective reality, but what they've done is they've created a just, I guess, a multiverse of madness, like Doctor Strange. There's just so much going on that reality's become almost subjective, where some people can now identify as cats and request litter boxes at their schools. So that's where we're at. And, I'd hate to think that truthers have the same habits that MSM believers do. I think we can be more discerning. And if there is some kind of a psyop at work here, I want to expose it. If there isn't, if reality is a psyop, I also want to expose that. Anyway, hey, thanks for calling. Appreciate
Yeah.
it very
Yeah,
much.
thanks a lot.
Thanks for all the input. Have a great night.
Thanks a lot. You too, man. Bye.
All right. No, whole other take on it. I mean, out of all the different things we've discussed regarding the Mandela effect, this is an interesting one, tying together all these different events to this other message, like there is a message being conveyed. Fascinating. Okay, and the thing's not set in stone yet. We're still working on it. There's more research going into it, and I might want to even end it on the subject of, well, I'll wait until later. No spoilers here. Again, I didn't show you anything that we have in the documentary as far as what's on the screen or any of the video clips we have, but I just wanted to go through the topics, the areas of discussion, possible explanations. My bias is having that it has something to do with retroactive eyewitness interference. I think there's a need to believe. I think there are more mundane explanations for how this can be created, and it's just a question of is there some kind of agency behind it? Do they have a list of these things, or is it throw them all at the wall and see what sticks? And that's what we're looking into. What happens to the ones that are debunked? For some, but not for others. What do these contradictions mean? And also, I think, if nothing else, at the end of a documentary like this, you should have something that you take with you as far as have you learned something. And one thing I think you would pick up is, am I being truthful when I say, quote, I remember? Like, are you being a true witness, or are you referencing something a little less than a specific memory? Because it matters. You're saying, I'm a source. State your sources. All right, so I'm going to go back into the topic later. That's pretty much it for now as far as the Mandela effect. I just think it's very important to get every opportunity I can to get more perspectives in on this topic, and that's one I haven't heard yet. So that will go into the final assessment for sure. The explanation that this is something with a divine origin and something that is using effects that specifically refer to biblical concepts, maybe to send a message. Very interesting. Brandon says ridiculous minutia with spiritual undertones. Well, it's one of the better explanations I've heard yet. I mean, what other use would there be for reality glitches? I mean, I've always seen synchronicities as such. Synchronicities as, hey, here's a glitch. This is something that tells you that there's more to the picture. There's a